This is a demonstration of Wirecast. This is a demonstration of Wirecast. This is a demonstration
Good morning,
of
everybody.
Wirecast.
Morena tātou. Good morning, Councillor Patterson. Can you hear us all right?
Perfectly, Madam Chair.
Great, thank you. And will you still be okay to do the karakia for us? Are you feeling well enough?
Certainly.
Okay,
Yep,
thank you.
no problem.
Great, thank you. Well, morena tātou, everybody. No mai, haere mai. Welcome to this Infrastructure and Environment Committee meeting, the 1st of November 2023. Welcome to our guests that are here today in the gallery, those presenting from Bay of Plenty Regional Council and the councillors. Welcome today. We look forward to hearing your kōrero, and also we have members from the committee nui. Thank you for attending from Ngāti Whakaui as well. We welcome your presence here today, and we hope that you find it interesting, the talk that we have later on. Our meeting has been live streamed, and I'd just like to remind the councillors to please turn off their cell phones, and the stream from today will be available online on the council website afterwards. We will attempt to have a break around 11 this morning, depending on how the session goes, and perhaps lunch at 1, depending on the length of our meeting. I'd just now like to start our meeting with a karakia, and I'll invite Councillor Patterson, please.
Tu taua mai I runga, taua mai I raro, tu taua mai I roto, tu taua mai I waho. Kia tau ai te Māori tū, te Māori ora, ki te katoa, hauie, huie, ai huie.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. We'll move to item 2, which is apologies. We have apologies, well, we have Councillor Maxwell and Councillor Patterson attending online, and that's all the apologies. We don't have any other apologies. I'd like to have a mover and a seconder that apologies be accepted. Councillor O'Brien and Councillor Kiriopa. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you.
And sorry, Councillor Waru is not necessarily an apology, but he will be here very shortly.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Item 3, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations today? There appear to be none. Item 4, urgent items that are not on the agenda. Are there any? There appear to be none. Thank you. We'll move on to item 5. On page 6 of the agenda, the confirmation of the minutes of the last Infrastructure and Environment Committee held on the 4th of October 2023. Could I ask for a mover and a seconder that the minutes of the Infrastructure and Environment Committee held on the 4th of October 2023 be confirmed as a true and correct record, please? Your Worship. And Councillor Kai Fong. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? It's carried. Thank you. We're moving on to the presentation this morning. On page 12, you will see in your minutes, in your agenda, the Bay of Plenty Regional Council is here today to present on their geothermal management plan. I would like to invite the councillors, Bay of Plenty Regional Councillors Winters, White and Thurston, along with the General Manager of Strategy and Science, Naomutu Potasi, Penny Dorman, the Program Leader for Geothermal, Freya Camburn, the Senior Policy Analyst, to come and speak to their presentation. We've allowed about 15 minutes or so for your presentation and about the same for questions, but we'll see how that goes. Thank you. And councillors will probably be aware that the plan has opened in August for consultation and closes around the 8th of December, I believe, for community feedback. I'll hand it over to you. Thank you.
Tuatahi mi ana ki a koe te rangatira mo tō tātou kariki e tēnei ata kei te mihi atu ki a koe. Te tiamana, e te marae kura, e ngā me mo te kaunihira, kei te mihi atu ki a koutou. Me koe hoki e te tūmua ke Gina, koutou mā, ngā kaimahi, kei te mihi atu ki a koutou. Me koutou hoki e te komiti Māori o komiti nui o nā
Demonstration of Wirecast.
Ko tēnei te rōpū no te kaunihira o toi moana, na hara mai nei ki te kōrero ki a koutou i rungi te whakātūranga o te wairiki o te rohi, o te rohi nei. No reira kei te mihi atu ki a koutou, tēnā koutou, a tēnā tātou katoa. Ka huri e te tiamana.
Kia ora.
All good?
Go ahead, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Kia ora tātou, everyone. As we have laboured the point on a number of occasions in recent times, this is another classic example of collaboration between the Regional Council, our community, and the Rotorua Lakes Council. So we're delighted to be here, and as you mentioned in your introduction, we've got Councillor Winters here, who's also our Chair of Operations and Monitoring, and of course Councillor White. And we also have Penny Dorman here, who's the Geothermal Program Leader, and Freya next to her, who is our Senior Policy Analyst specialising in matters geothermal. So you did mention that we had about half an hour, about 15 minutes for a presentation, give or take, and 15 minutes for questions, but you said you were somewhat flexible. I think that's still the issue.
To some extent.
And up in the public gallery, we have a raft of scientists to answer all your questions and senior planners who have a specific focus on matters geothermal.
Fantastic.
So if time is short, I'd like to hand over now to Penny, and she'll lead the presentation on behalf of the Bay of Plenty Regional Council.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you so much.
This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Through the Mayor, Chair and Councillors, we are very excited to be here today, and thank you very much for having us on your agenda. I'm Namuta Potasi, General Manager of Strategy and Science, and we're here today to present to you the culmination of 5 years' worth of work on Waiariki or Rotorua, our geothermal system management plan, and did just also want to acknowledge the Ahi Kāropu, who members are in the audience today who helped contribute to the development of this. So just briefly, what we'll be covering before I quickly hand over to Penny is the, we are conscious we've only got 15 minutes, so there is quite a lot of material to get through in that time. So we will move at pace through some of this. We'll cover what is the geothermal system in Rotorua. We'll talk about what is a system management plan. We'll talk about how it was drafted and who was involved in helping draft and frame that. We'll talk about what the key drivers for management of the system are. We'll talk about the key changes that are being proposed as part of this care plan for the geothermal system. And we'll talk about the implications in the process from here. I do want to note that because we do have such a limited time, there is another key opportunity on the 20th of November, which is a technical workshop. So there's another key opportunity to have more discussions and for you to be able to find out more and ask more of those technical questions, which we might not have the full amount of time to talk about today. So I'll hand over to Penny.
Of Wirecast.
Tēnā koutou I ra rangatira. Thank you for the introductions, councillors and Namuta. I'm going to very, very quickly run through this presentation. It's quite a lot to cover in 10 to 15 minutes, so I'll be moving at quite a pace. But what we're suggesting is that if you can hold questions to the end of the presentation, because I think we may answer some of your questions as we go through. If there's anything absolutely burning, do chip in though. So Rotorua geothermal system is one of 12 geothermal systems that the Bay of Plenty Regional Council manages under the Resource Management Act. And we categorise these different systems for different purposes under our regional policy statement. So from development at Kawerau, for example, to a protected system such as at Waimangu, and Rotorua has its own very special purpose category. That's because it has an interesting mix of incredibly rare and special geothermal surface features, or NAFA, and incredibly rich cultural values around that, but also a reasonably high level of use of for space and water heating, direct heat use for space and water heating and for bathing. So it's quite a unique system, and for that reason we try to manage it to balance those competing uses, but we manage it first to protect the surface features, so they come as a priority. Prioritised over extractive use of the resource.
This is a demonstration of
So this diagram actually captures a whole lot of different concepts, and I think it's important just to talk to some of them. We know that over the history of Rotorua, particularly the more recent history of the last 50 to 60 years, that we haven't always managed that balance between protecting surface features and the use of the resource. During the 1960s and 70s, the system was being very heavily used and the geothermal aquifer was being very heavily drawn down, and that led to a loss of a lot of our precious taonga, the surface features, and the government responded in quite a dramatic way. Central government stepped in and basically initiated the bore closure program, which I know is quite close to many people's hearts in Rotorua. That what you see on the diagram there is data that's been gathered over many decades of our geothermal aquifer water level. It's the geothermal aquifer that drives the surface features. So having that, keeping that aquifer hot and full and healthy is what's absolutely essential to keep the surface features healthy. So it's a really important measure for us as a regional council to know whether the system is being managed in a sustainable way. And you can see there at the far left of the screen, pre-bore closures, the aquifer was 2 metres lower than what it is currently. Post-bore closure, there was quite a rapid recovery. I think the aquifer rose within 2 to 3 years by 2 metres, and we saw quite a rapid recovery of surface features at that time, particularly in places like Kuira Park. The recovery of features elsewhere was a little bit slower and less consistent, and in some places those surface features haven't fully recovered and may still recover further. But the key point there too, you can see that the orange water line, the orange line there is showing you what we consider to be, we call it a strategic equilibria, where the water levels, the aquifer water levels are basically trucking along at a fairly healthy level, and certainly at a point where the surface features are being well sustained. At some points, the aquifer has dropped in level, and that's usually in response to climate fluctuations. So there's two things that influence that aquifer water level. It's the climate, but it's also the uses. So if you're taking water from the aquifer and you're not putting it back, that's going to affect the aquifer. If you're taking too much heat out of the aquifer and at a rate that more quickly than what it can replenish, then that will also affect that aquifer water level. And the key point, the key takeaway from this diagram is the difference between a healthy aquifer and an unhealthy aquifer is really only about 2 metres. It's not a whole lot, particularly if you have sustained periods of drought. So what is our system management plan? It's really a whole system management plan to give effect to Council's geothermal functions under the RMA, and those functions are for the allocation of geothermal water, heat and energy, and it's also a requirement of the regional policy statement. The scope is limited to our functions to allocate geothermal, so it doesn't have any direction for the district plan, though it may have some useful pointers in there that may be helpful in that regard. And it's not the regional plan too. So the regional plan is what contains all this very specific rules, and we're signalling an intent that we also need to do a regional plan change to give some regulatory effect to some of the things that are sitting within the system management plan. How have we developed this? It's been quite a long process, as Namuta said. We don't like to stress how long it's been, but it has been quite a considerable process I guess certainly over 20 years since the last regional plan was notified, and really building up our evidence base and all of the technical inputs into the plan. More recently, over the last 4 to 5 years, we've been working really closely with the community through a number of different forums, and that's included multiple huia iwi. We engaged early and first with Māori to get input, and as a result of that, we had the establishment of the Rotorua Rupu, which has been a Haukainga working group set up to ensure that the voice of Haukainga was heard through this process. And I just want to acknowledge that some of the members of that group, which has changed a little bit in extent in recent times, are in the room in support today. So we've also gone through a number of different processes with our own councillors, and also just acknowledging the Rotorua Geothermal Liaison Group, which I think at the time Councillor Donaldson and Peter Bentley were involved with, supported by staff Rosemary Viskovich and Peter Brownbridge. Freya, did you want to talk briefly about some of the engagement we're doing at the moment?
Yeah, I guess just to add to what Penny said, there has been quite a process of engagement leading up to the development of what is a draft document currently, but there's still an ongoing process. So just through this, since we've released the draft, we've had multiple drop-in sessions for people to just come and talk to us, ask questions. We've had really great turnout at those. It's been really nice to see. So a lot of level of engagement with geothermal in this community. We've also had a social media campaign that's reached about 11,000 people. We've done a mail drop to 7,000 households in the affected area. We've had one technical workshop already, which was very much a presentation of the science that sits behind the system management plan. And that's what Namuta referred to before. There was such a lot of interest in that. We're going to be holding another one of those on the 20th of November. It's in the afternoon from 1 till 3 at the Novotel. And it will be about 2 hours long, and it will be our scientists really talking people through all of the monitoring we do, some of the modelling work we do, what the story, what the different data that we gather is telling us, and what has been our basis for some of the decision making that is fed through into this plan. I guess just the only other thing to add to that is in terms of the Ahikarupu, they're remaining involved with this process. They will keep working with us until this document is finalised, and they're going to be part of the panel that will hear the oral feedback on this draft, which will be in February next year.
So what work have we been doing to build our evidence base for the system management plan? As I said before, it's actually quite a lot. We've been doing long-term monitoring for many decades. So we've been monitoring the surface features in Rotorua for decades now. 36 features get monitored bi-monthly by the Regional Council. And we also have got designated monitoring wells to monitor the health of the geothermal aquifer. We also do a whole lot of other technical work, so heat flow surveys, chemistry, thermal infrared. So there's a lot going on in our science team. And as Freya said, if you're interested, please come along to one of our technical sessions. Also reservoir modelling, so that's the mathematical modelling that we use to try and predict what changes we might see in the system if we were to change use. It's a really important tool. We use it in the freshwater, groundwater modelling space as well. We had a Ahikaroa Rupu also prepared a document called He Kohi Kohi Ngā, which gave a very specific Haukainga perspective on the health of the system, the health of the Ngāwhā, and also their perspectives on what well-being and what well-being and mode of geothermal would mean to them in that context. We've also worked on sort of some of the operational best practice guidelines, and some of those Rotorua Lakes Council has been involved with. In fact, I'd say almost all of those, in particular things like the well maintenance, keeping geothermal wells safe, and also how we manage geothermal discharges, because you have a particular interest, obviously, with your sewer network. If you wanted to find out more, I think we included some links in your background package, but please do visit our website for more information. So what have our key findings been? And this is where all the drivers for the system management plan come from. We know the system's recovered, but we think it's still changing and it may recover more. It's a really important point. We also know that to keep our surface features healthy, we need a hot and a full aquifer. And our modelling is showing that increasing geothermal water takes, but also heat-only takes, could affect surface heat flows and therefore could affect our geothermal surface features. We also know that we won't get a whole lot of warning if we get things wrong, so we want to creep up on changes to the system, not run up. And we also know that that safe operating space is quite small. I mentioned 2 metres before. That's not a whole lot of space, particularly as we move into areas of climate uncertainty. From a more social perspective, it came to us really strongly that access is weighted towards commercial use. So that's been a really big driver for us in terms of what's come through the system management plan, in terms of how we should be prioritising future use. And of course that our treaty partnership must underpin management, and again that's come through in the system management plan quite strongly. So we've come up with a package which is our system management plan, which includes a central vision which is really about protecting the modi of the geothermal system, and then signalling the principles that we'd expect to work under, and then 8 broad management areas, including things like protecting customer uses, prioritising allocation, managing effects on surface features, protecting the health of the aquifer. And so from there, under each of those areas, we've got some quite specific actions. We're not going to talk about all of them now, but Freya, did you want to comment on the care plan aspect of it?
Yeah, I guess just to add to what Penny said, at the heart of this document is really that it's been developed as a care plan that came through very strongly through our engagement and development of this document, that the focus had to be on caring for the health of the system rather than maximising the use of the resource. It's kind of that subtle shift in language, but it has driven the intent of the document.
So what are the key changes proposed? Firstly, providing for mātauranga Māori. So that came through really strongly and right through our engagement, right from the start of the process. Where is the mātauranga Māori? How is that being used in decision making? So I won't speak to all of the actions in the action plan at this point, but that is something that Council is signalling it needs to be appropriately resourced and to be led by tangata whenua. We also need to protect the aquifer health, again going back to that idea of a safe operating space, and our modelling is showing that we need to keep use at or close to current levels, and that includes retaining the requirement for re-injection, but also controlling how much heat can be taken from the system. We've identified areas that are particularly sensitive, so that the 1.5 exclusion zone, I think most of you will already be familiar with. We are intending on retaining that, but have also identified other parts of the system that are particularly sensitive around surface features, and also identifying that the deep system, so currently we're using from the intermediate aquifer, that's where we're taking most of the geothermal water, we're signalling that because of a lack of information and lack of knowledge about the deep geothermal system and the potential risk of taking from that on the geysers, that needs to be treated as quite a sensitive part of the system and treated as a research system. We've also, I think one of the key changes is we're signalling future prioritisation of use. So that is basically saying, where can we get the best use of this resource for the most people? And a lot of the feedback from the community came down to customary, communal and wellness uses, not cheap electricity. Finally, more re-injection, more efficiency through downhole heat exchangers and metering, and also tangata whenua oversight of implementation of the SMP. And we're talking about that at a governance level, and there's a proposal in there for a governance level group between Bay of Plenty Regional Council and tangata whenua to ensure that oversight and management is taking that holistic perspective. So how will the system management plan be used? What does it mean now? It's not a regional plan, so it doesn't have a high level of regulatory weight, but it will be considered in resource consent applications, but a regional plan change is still needed. So what this is more of an operational document that guides future decisions. And what does it mean now? This is the million-dollar question that most people want us to get to right at the start of the presentation. It means that sustainable customary practice is unaffected, but actually more importantly that it's protected and prioritised. As you know, our responsibility is to ensure that we keep the system healthy so that those uses can continue. Existing consented takes would continue, but there'd be more scrutiny around things like efficiency and monitoring of take on consent renewal, particularly in some of the sensitive management areas. And I think perhaps the biggest message here is that for new or increased takes, there is going to be much more careful assessment and scrutiny, and that new takes, particularly new large takes, are going to be very unlikely. They've got quite a high bar to cross. That's quite difficult messaging for the Rotorua community. We're aware of that. We've found that in the engagement we've done so far, we've had a lot of support for that. People get that the guises must come first. They get that customary practice must come first. So there's a lot of support for that. But it's a challenge to make sure that we've got consistent messaging about what the capacity for the system is, and also realistic expectations. Because sometimes I think we have a lot of verbiage about what can happen in Rotorua, but the aquifer is very sensitive and vulnerable, and our guises are very precious. So next steps, we have a technical presentation on the 20th of November, which Freya and Namuta have spoken to, and our feedback closes on the 8th of December, so we fully expect and will welcome a feedback from Rotorua Lakes Council, and that feedback will be considered by a joint panel including our own councillors, but also representatives from our ahika ropu. And following the adoption of the SMP, we'll then move into the formal plan change process, and the plan change will lock in some of the content of the system management plan, things like prioritisation of use and allocation limits. So that's where that's the pointy end of the process. And just to finish, I guess there are some key things that you may like to think about. Again, consistent messaging. How do we work together to ensure that we're consistently messaging to the community? How do we continue to strengthen our existing working relationships? We do a lot together at an operational level, and that's working really well. Are there ways we can strengthen that? And what are your thoughts on some of the other proposals that we're putting forward in the SMP? And I'm hoping that didn't take a whole lot more than 10 or 15 minutes.
You did a really great job.
Kia ora.
Thank you, Penny. Kia ora. Thank you for the presentation, for both of you actually, and all of you. I'd just like to now ask the councillors if they have any questions, and if they could make them nice and concise, that'd be wonderful. Yes, Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your presentation. Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of people very interested in this topic, and there are controversial elements to it, isn't there? I'm pretty good at English. I'm not quite so good at my reo. I wonder if you could help me what the customary practices are, for example, that must come first.
I'm probably not the best person to speak to that, but I'm sure there are others in this room that would speak much more eloquently about that. But the content that we've included in the system management plan basically signals those practices that have been sustainably carried out by tangata whenua for many, many hundreds of years. So that includes the things such as bathing, spiritual use, cooking, those kinds of things. And I think I may be guessing where you may be heading with this question, but we've signalled that is customary practice can be considered distinct from a customary use, which could still be, say, for home heating, that kind of thing. It is something that is moving with modern times, but still reflecting the traditional uses that you'd expect to have seen from the use of geothermal, so heating your home, for example. We've asked some specific questions in the system management plan about whether we've got that right, and we think it comes a lot back to managing effects. So we've tried to distinguish between managing, looking at sustainable practices with very minimal effect on the aquifer and on surface features, and those practices that might have been for customary uses, but that could have a bigger impact.
Okay. What does protecting the Maori of the system mean?
Kia ora, Madam Chair, if I may answer, and just want to pay my respects to Councillor Waru over there. He's probably a greater expert at speaking to this matter than I am. But since it's been asked of this particular regional council, can I just reflect firstly on the first question that was asked? You know, it's all about well-being. You know, in our traditional times, we used to for cooking, for heat, for healing, for bathing, those sorts of things. And we were well known and respected around this country for the utilisation and the taonga that we had here. And of course, if you fast forward to today, things have changed considerably in the context of the use of that particular taonga. But from a Māori perspective, we still hold fast to those well-being attributes of it. And so the customary use and the matauranga that's been referred to refers to that, to the well-being. And I won't go into any more detail than that. In terms of protecting the Māori, it has got everything to do with the well-being and a spiritual relationship to all things. And treasuring these things to the extent that you respect it, that you don't take too much from it. As you give, as you take, so you give back. It's the balance of all things. So I just want to make it very, very clear that from our council's perspective and my staff's perspective, and when we're talking about Māori and those sorts of things, that is the fundamental essence of it all. It's about well-being for all peoples and for the resource that we treasure the most. Kia ora.
Kia ora, thank you, Councillor. Right. Is that the last question, or is there more?
No, I have one or two more.
Just remember not to monopolise this, we need to get around the room.
It's the answers that are longer. If we could switch, well, I guess my next question is concerning the governance of this that's been proposed. I took from your comments there, Te Taru, spiritual relationship. There's a number of things in here. Te Ao Maori view is a rich source of knowledge. Our treaty partnership must underpin the management. Tangata whenua oversight. Is this management plan effectively, is it a co-governance arrangement? Or is this tangata whenua governance? I mean, what's the governance structure here?
I think we can just, would you like to, this?
Okay, I'll answer this. It's just a respect for a relationship that has been traditional through time. It goes back to the original peoples here who actually utilised and protected and nurtured this particular resource. Mm-hmm. So it's appropriate that they should be around the table in some form, looking at co-decision making, strategic thinking and sense in this particular space. It isn't about dominating, it's about working together for the best interests of that particular taonga. So call it co-governance, call it what you will. It's not co-government. Call it co-governance or call it co-design, call it what you like. But it's participation of the people who originally have used this and have still used it for the purposes I've just outlined. So I'm sorry if that's a long answer, Councillor. In your book it's quite long, but I will just have to rest it there on behalf of the Council, unless you want to add.
Thank you for your answer.
Thank you. Thank you for articulating clearly. You're giving us a good picture of where. I'd like to move on to Naomi Tapsell for her questions, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. Look, I do want to apologise for the nature of some of the questions that you've just heard. It is very important to this Council as well that when we are looking at protecting our resources, that we are considering all elements, whether it's economics, social or cultural and environmental, which I know is very important to you too. So thank you very much for your presentation. I did have a number of questions, but you have such good information in here. Most of them were answered, but a key question that I did want to ask, because I know it is of great interest to our community, is we have had significant improvements in technology and innovation since the Borgal closures in the 1980s. And I appreciate that the customary practice and the wellbeing is the stronger focus than electricity, But the context of our community is we are facing significant financial pressures. We have many unhealthy homes, and for some families, heating the homes through a sustainable resource is desirable. So when we talk about management of it, is there the possibility for small residential uses of it for heat, or is what you're putting in your SMP, I think it's called, actually signalling that that's not what is desired in future, or it would be very difficult to get a consent for that? It's a question that we frequently get asked.
Yes, thank you, through you, Madam Chair. It's a really good question, and it's something that people really, really struggle with in Rotorua when they're saying, well, look, we're living on top of all of this heat. What are we doing? We should be heating the town. The simple fact is that we also live on the top of a really significant system which has some of New Zealand's only last remaining geysers. Geysers are incredibly sensitive, and we know that if we take too much heat from the system, we will affect them. What we are, when you talk about improved technology, totally agree. So previously to bore closures, water was taken and not re-injected. We now require re-injection of 90% of the resource. That's great. That's worked really, really well. We have to keep doing that, and we're going to push for more of that as well. So sinking lid. We also want to push for the use of downhole heat exchangers, because as most of you will know, that is also a more efficient way to use the resource, has a lower footprint on the aquifer, and for a whole lot of reasons they're better. So our regional plan, and certainly the system management plan, is pushing towards more use of downhole heat exchangers. We do currently have quite a few small home heating schemes, so houses that are maybe 24 to 28 houses off single bores, or geothermal wells, I should say. So we already have that situation where we're getting home heating, but I think what we're signalling in the SMP is that the concept of heating Rotorua with geothermal, and that being the primary energy use, that is simply not feasible in terms of the ability of the resource and the aquifer that we're drawing from to be able to sustain that. So that's where we need to be looking at our housing stock, our insulation, double glazing, those kinds of things, and alternative energy sources. Not to say there's no use, there is current use, we're not intending on closing that down, but we're signalling heating Rotorua with geothermal will have an effect on surface features, and most people we've spoken to have agreed that the surface features fuel $1 billion economy in Rotorua, and they're really important, not to mention from an environmental and cultural perspective.
Madam Chair, this line of questioning normally drifts into the area of Iceland, and I predict there'll be a question even today about Iceland. Why can't we be more like the Icelandic people? But look, I can just assure you we've got scientists, they're actually in the room here today, who have been personally involved in case studies around Iceland. You can't compare the two. I don't want to take up time today, but I extend the invitation to offer you our scientists who have actually been on the ground in Iceland and can share with you what can work there and what can't work for us here.
Thank you, appreciate that. We are all aware now that there's another technical workshop that we can attend to ask anyway around that. Any other questions from you, Mayor Tapsell? Councillor Waru.
Tēnā koe te hea mana, thank you, Karen, and I'll keep my kōrero to questions and wait for comments to make some comments I would like to make.
Certainly, thank you.
Tēnā koutou. Kai te miha tura kia koutou, he mana ki mai ana i te kaupapa nei. Yeah, it's been a long journey for you, I know that. I've been there since day dot, so some good work been happening in the background there to get to the point where we are today. So kai te miha tura kia koutou. I just have a few questions in terms of some of the slides that you mentioned in the bore closure. So this is a very close to my heart. I studied this. I've been to Iceland too, by the way, Councillor, and all that stuff. So I have good knowledge around those things, but probably not the up-to-date knowledge that your staff have now. But however, was there any was there a look into what the deluge rainfall or the El Nino and stuff like that at that time that's informed those numbers? Because aquifer levels are one thing, but also surface reservoir levels are another thing that have a big impact on our geothermal system. And at that time, our stormwater systems were not the greatest. So I was just wondering how those have been taken into account in the research that's been presented, if I can ask.
I'll perhaps give a very quick answer, and then our scientists may want to chip in if you want more. But we know that the aquifer we've done long-term assessment as part of the system management plan, looking at the effect of rainfall on the aquifer. So we know that there is a correlation there, you're quite right. But the significant decline in the aquifer at that point was because the water was being taken out using geothermal wells and not put back in. So about 30,000 tonnes a day was being extracted from the aquifer and not being re-injected, and that is how we account for the majority of that decline. Once we started to re-inject, we went from, I think, 30,000 tonnes going down the drain to only 1,000 now. So, and that resulted in that significant and rapid increase. So it's understanding those long-term trends really help us to get a better idea of what are the true drivers. But absolutely, you're right, climate does have an impact.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's a big impact. So, you know, it might be quite interesting if you look up there in those years. So, you know, I've always been a tangata that's believed it wasn't just about the bore closures. If you would look, and maybe you're able to provide me with the answers around the percentage of commercial versus residential at that time that were shut down. My understanding at that time, commercial use was still permitted, and most of it was residential use that was canned within that 1.5 kilometre radius. Now, what percentage of that was actually residential use? Do you have that, those answers? Sorry, am I getting a bit
sorry, what was your question? What was the percentage?
The residential use at that time was actually quite minimal, so I'm just wondering, and it's been attributed to the fact that the geysers at the time came back to life. I'm just asking what percentage of the residential use at that time accounted for the overall use?
I couldn't tell you the exact statistics at that time, but we now know at the moment it's about 80% commercial. And I think the comment I'd like to make is that the reason for that we have a lot of commercial and less residential is that when we move to the requirement for re-injection, that puts significant financial costs on people. And it disadvantaged domestic properties, it particularly disadvantaged tangata whenua, and a lot of wells were closed because there wasn't an ability to pay for a well to re-inject. If they couldn't re-inject, they were forcibly closed down. So there was a lot of hurt at that time. And in terms of how much was domestic, and I think there was a lot of domestic use at that time. People were using it for their individual baths, that kind of thing. And we know, I mean, that the statistics show very, very clearly on that first slide I showed, there was, following re-injection, there was a really rapid increase in the aquifer. So yeah, the financial implications of bore closures were quite considerable on people, which is why we've signalled in the system management plan that we'd like to see a shift back. So a shift back to that domestic use and shift back to those more customary uses. And we can achieve that by seeking more efficiency from the current commercial users. So more re-injection and potentially shift to downhole heat exchanges. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah. Okay, bye. Good, thank you. Just two more questions, sorry. Okay. So the next question is around the, I think there was a line in one of the tangata whenua oversight, I think it was, it said, and then it was the treaty versus the tiriti. Can you just clarify for me, please, which is the one going to be used in this document?
I think as it stands at the moment is referenced as the tiriti. So I understand there is some debate around that particular matter, whether it's treaty or the tiriti. Those are ongoing discussions at the moment that are not only held with this council, but councils around the motu at the moment. But as it stands in the particular document, as I see it's referenced as the tiriti, unless I can be corrected otherwise, that's the wording that's been used at the moment.
Oh, ka pai, yeah, I just saw it on the PowerPoint, it was treaty, because it's a bit different. That's why I ask. And my last question is really just around the use, there was mātauranga Māori, but you know, what other documents or other research has been done to sort of inform what's been presented today in terms of mana whenua, tangata whenua?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So not a whole lot. So the document that we worked with our ahikāroa rōpū, that was really the first time we'd ever done something like that, and I'd stress that it was the first, but it was kind of the first step towards a long process. So what we've signalled in the SMP is that, or in the draft, is that kind of perspective and mātauranga Māori needs to be gathered and to contribute to decision making. We acknowledge it's not a role for council to do that, it's a role for tangata whenua, but we also acknowledge that in the same way that we would financially support the likes of GNS to do reservoir modelling for us, that kind of work needs to be financially supported. So while we can't answer that now, what we're doing is setting a path in motion where we can say, okay, that needs to be led by tangata whenua. What is that knowledge? How does that knowledge guide and contribute to our decision making? And that's also another reason why we are suggesting this governance group with tangata whenua representation, because in that manner you can bring tangata whenua perspectives and mātauranga Māori to that decision-making table.
Thank you, Penny. Yeah, I have my own kaupapa around that kōrero, but I'll save that for another time. Look, I've got wamutu aku pātai. I just thank you again to the team and ki te ahi kāroa anō, mo te mahi nui I o tike I a koutou. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Waru. I've got a question from Councillor O'Brien and then Councillor Kaifong.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through the Chair, thank you everybody for coming along today, much appreciated. Penny, could I just ask, you mentioned before the Rotorua Geothermal Liaison Group, and the two councillors you named, one hasn't been a councillor for 13 months approximately, and the other one about 15 to 16 months. So is the group still active, or is someone else, you know, that seems a while away since...
I knew you were going to ask that question.
Good. Then you'll have a great answer for me. I look forward to it.
So the group was involved for about at least 4 years probably. It was right at the start of the process, and those councillors were quite committed to attending those workshops that we had. Once we got into this stage of drafting the document and co-design with our Haukainga group, a lot of the progress was happening quite rapidly and right at the time of your local government elections. So there was a period there that there were no representatives either from Regional Council or Rotorua Lakes Council to contribute to that discussion, so that the group was in abeyance for a short time. We also now acknowledge that because we're proposing in the system management plan this governance group, that it's time to probably review how that Rotorua Liaison Group continues and what role it would have. But I just will stress that we are also, and I don't want to muddy the waters, but we're also progressing a region-wide plan change for geothermal. So that will be looking at systems outside of Rotorua, so including Tahiki, Tikiteri, and all of the other geothermal systems. So there will certainly be a need for us to be engaging closely with Rotorua Lakes Council through that process as well. So whether it's some kind of form similar to that Rotorua Liaison Group, that remains to be seen, and we're certainly open for discussion on that.
Through the Chair as well, we would certainly welcome feedback from Rotorua Lakes Council in terms of the role you want to play in this space, so that we can understand what that might look like. We do have a lot of shared functions when it comes to geothermal, so we welcome feedback.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I could just have a couple more very quick ones. Could I just ask, when you state up there in your presentation, access weighted towards commercial use, so does commercial incorporate tourism, or are we talking a commercial use outside of tourism?
Yeah, so that's talking about the allocation of the geothermal fluid. So that's not talking about tourism. That's not talking about the likes of Te Puia and Whakarewarewa and entities like that. It's talking about use of geothermal fluid. So it would pick up other kind of entities, perhaps like the Polynesian Spa, for example. It picks up those types of uses, but it doesn't talk to the kind of scenic tourism values.
Okay. I'll leave that one. Thank you. You've answered it. That's fine. Could I ask, when you issue a resource consent or renew a resource consent, because I've seen copies of the bills from some of our constituents, by and large, who takes over the responsibility for monitoring those consents that you issue?
So the most resource consents are for 10 years in Rotorua, and most of those consents have specific conditions around how much you can take and the rate that you can take it. And then we have a compliance team which does a regular compliance visits to those sites to look at whether the allocation and the conditions of a consent are being met. So it's a little bit of both. It's actually it's the responsibility of the consent holder to be providing data on how much of the geothermal resource that they're using and whether that fits within the envelope of their consent. But we also have a compliance role in making sure that that's indeed the case. One of the problems we've had is that often the data that gets submitted with resource consents doesn't give us a very good measure of how much is actually being used. So we're now installing for the top 30 systems on the system that use, I think, 75% of the take. We're now requiring continuous metering from those users so that we'll get much better monitoring data. So there's a dual responsibility, consent holder and regional council.
Thank you. Could I just quote you from your presentation here, sorry, from the folder. There is not endless resource for all, so regional council needs to prioritise uses that benefit the most people. If there's new Papakainga housing established, would those people be considered under the wellness part, like as in brand new users? Is that recognised, or is unfortunately what we've got is what we've got to try and spread around? Bearing in mind, obviously, re-injector technology, as you've stated.
Yeah, so we've had lots of discussions around Papakainga housing those types of developments. It absolutely falls, in our view, it falls under that umbrella of community wellbeing. So absolutely it would be considered a priority use. Obviously, you still have to manage that within your sustainable envelope, but absolutely it would come further up that priority order than heating a hotel, for example. They're very different things. Whilst they might be using a bore to get the heat, it is absolutely a customary practice.
Thank you. And just finally, sorry, I'm aware of time, Councillor Barker, could I just ask, on page 30 of your presentation, it talks about setting up the geothermal governance group. And I'm quoting here, providing from contributions from key stakeholders, i.e. Rotorua Lakes Council. I would say I have a slight concern that we're almost seen as a slightly second tier as opposed to a three-way partner, given our close amount of work that we do in geothermal. And obviously we also represent a lot of interests both from mana whenua, Te Arawa and the wider community. So I do have a concern reading this that it almost is reducing us down slightly. I'm sure it's not the intention, but that's certainly something down the track that I'd be most keen to make sure that this council is a stronger voice than what's implied in the presentation. Thank you all very much for your question, for your time.
I'd like to reply to that.
Oh, through the chair, and absolutely that was not the intention. So we do acknowledge the wording, and we'll look to in future bits of information reflects the partnership properly.
Thank you very much. Councillor Kofong.
Chair, just one question. Just wanted to go back to the question that Mayor Tapsell asked, and it was just around the use for domestic. So I can understand that we need to preserve the surface features for the tourism perspective, but from a Rotorua Inc. perspective, it's all about the livability, and what we're based on is our sparsity concept, the fact that we've got geothermal heat, and making sure that we are not, I suppose, downplaying the fact that I don't think the Mayor was saying it needs to be across all of Rotorua, but we do need to make geothermal available where we can, where it's efficient with downhole heat exchangers, and actually be promoting that rather than saying that, and I think this was the point that, I don't know if Councillor Waru, in terms of the reference to access is weighted towards commercial use, is how we can make sure that from a public perspective that they're aware that geothermal is available for efficient downhole heat exchangers and that it should be promoted and used for efficient home heating and
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. It's a really tricky dilemma because really you're talking about competing values and competing uses. What we've tried to say is that certainly where we've got existing home heating schemes and group schemes, absolutely, they are really important, and we very much hope they continue. We also think that if there is some small capacity to increase that, then that would be something that we'd be wanting to enable as well. But what we're saying, and we need to say this quite clearly, and it comes back to that consistent messaging and realistic expectations, what we're saying is that there is a limit to how much heat can be taken off the system. We know that even if we're using downhole heat exchangers, if we use too much, that will affect the aquifer and it will affect surface features. So we need to manage that really carefully, and there's not a very big operating space. So when we're talking about small, potentially incremental change for home heating, I don't think that is something we're ruling out, but we've been quite clear that we think we are fast approaching that limit, and at some point we'll be putting through our regional plan limits to how much heat and water can be taken out of the aquifer, and that will mean that consents would be declined. I know that's a bitter pill to swallow and it's really difficult, but we think that, honestly, we think given that the importance of those surface features on a whole lot of levels, that's what the focus of our care plan is. That's got to be good for Rotorua, protecting our customary values, customary practices that we're seeing in the village, and protecting the taonga and a low-level, low-impact use for smaller scale direct heat use. That's where we need to be heading, and that does mean that there are some limitations. I sort of feel like the bad cop here, but...
Yeah, I suppose that would be for the public to perhaps provide some further consultation as to whether they saw the importance of the surface as against that, or the environmental against the other. I suppose it's also a social impact too for the families that potentially could benefit from living in warmer homes. Thank you.
Yeah, if I may, just one final comment on the cultural value of the geothermal. And
sorry, no, I wasn't meaning.
No, I was going to comment on Te Puia and the Puhutu geyser, and the last 3 remaining geysers in the southern hemisphere are major attractions for us. There was always a fear that that geyser could disappear. I was a CEO for 3 years in that particular place. Understand what it would impact us if those geysers were to disappear. There were over 40 geysers originally, and over time that has gone down to the last 3. So that did play a big part in my view as well around that particular taonga as a unique feature. And so all of these things come into a matter of balancing the commercial, the domestic, the cultural, the customary, all those sorts of things. So it's a very tricky regime that we have to manage. We appreciate the tensions that can bring in certain parts, but I think from a regional council's point of view, it's getting the right balance and being able to present a plan that can achieve that.
Thank you, Councillor White. Just one final question from Councillor Patterson, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I hope you can hear me. I must admit I've been struggling to hear the conversation, so I do apologise if I repeat somebody else's question. But I did pick up on a couple of points that were made by, I think, the Worship and also Deputy Mayor Kai Fong. Hark back to a presentation that you made to us on the 6th of September regarding the air shed and the likelihood that we will be not granting new fire permits for the new houses that are going to be built in Rotorua for the foreseeable future with the change of the air quality levels brought on by government moving the goalposts, I think you mentioned. So the stated goal was 6,000 new homes between now and 2030 in Rotorua. So if you work that out roughly, that's 24,000 new residents. So my concern is that here we are in Rotorua surrounded by forests, so a wonderful natural resource there, and we have another beautiful natural resource under the earth. If we're saying that we are going to stop utilising that for new homes going forward, or even not even allow them to be built to protect the resource, then I can understand that. But we're really putting our residents at risk. If you can only look at Hawke's Bay, if that had happened in the middle of winter here in Rotorua, we'd be looking at a city that would freeze with all of these new residents who have no fires and no geothermal. And to me, we would be negligent to make sure when we have those resources available, and we've just made a rule to stop that carte blanche. When we have those resources available, surely with new technology, there must be a way to find a balance that allows those resources to be utilised for everybody's well-being, to use the words of Councillor White.
Thank you, Councillor. Did you have a question as well, or no?
Well, the question is that going to be factored in, the risk to our community by not utilising these resources going forward if we have a major natural disaster?
Thank you. Can you answer that?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, I think an important point to note is that the geothermal system sits mainly under the CBD in the central part of the city. So it's not necessarily a solution for some of the greenfield development that you might be seeing in Rotorua. There are other options that also use geothermal in a slightly different way, which is ground source heat pumps. And I know that there are some recent developments that have been happening in the vicinity that are using that technology in a really positive way. So I think an opportunity to look at those technologies and encourage them for greenfield or redevelopment is going to be a really, really great opportunity for Rotorua. And we can certainly put you in contact with some of the providers and some of the experts in that field to talk about what those options are. We absolutely agree that a carte blanche cutting off of geothermal heating for homes is not acceptable, and that's not what we're proposing. We're certainly wanting to protect those existing consent holders, and where there is room to move, where there is wriggle room, as we call it, or an available allocation, that is exactly the kind of use that we need to prioritise. But I guess there's a bottom line, and the bottom line is that cannot be at the expense of the geysers. And I acknowledge the comment that that's the community to feed back on. Indeed it is. All our engagement to date has said that the surface features and customary practices must come first. We may hear something different through this process. We'll see. Kia ora.
Thank you, Penny.
Just one final question then. Is geothermal power off the table for Rotorua?
The question was, is geothermal power off the table? Was that the question for Rotorua?
Did you mean geothermal and electricity generation?
Yes.
Yeah, I would say it would be fair to say that's off the table for Rotorua. But it's not off the table for other geothermal systems within the Rotorua Lakes Rohe. So that's a really important thing to remember, that you still have other geothermal systems, particularly in the Waikato region, that have enormous potential for geothermal electricity generation. But the Rotorua, the small Rotorua system, which fills significant surface features, doesn't have that capacity. And we know that because of our previous experience with fields like Wairaki.
Can I just add to that? I guess there'll be conversations to be had with the likes of Taheke and others as you go out there, and you can see their geothermal planning has been happening for some time. But that's a matter to be considered further down the track.
Thank you. Is there any further comments from the Bay of Plenty Regional Councillors or presenters?
Before you close and farewell us, I just wanted to share some good news with you. And it's for Deputy Mayor Kai Fong and Councillor Brown and Councillor Waru. Before I hand over to Namuta to announce it and let her do the trumpeting, I just wanted to say how much we thoroughly enjoyed as a regional council working with Rotorua Lakes Council on the future development strategy. I know you tire of me talking about collaboration, but we thoroughly enjoyed it, and we thought we were incredibly productive, and it could only have been achieved working closely together. But I know you're desperate to close the meeting, so give them the good news, Namuta.
Tēnā koutou again. So in terms of the good news, just to recognise the work that we've done together on the future development strategy, we know that it's coming to your council on the 22nd of November to review, discuss and approve. So we have also organised our meeting for the 22nd of November so that we can do that on the same day together. So, yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. If that probably brings things to a close, I think we've had a great deal of information imparted from you today. It's informed us. Yes, there's a question from, a comment from the back. You come forward to a mic if you like. Can you just? Oh, sorry.
I just want to make a comment.
Oh, excuse me. Sorry, I didn't realise. I thought you were one of the advisors with the Bay of Plenty. No, I misunderstood. But if you have some. You can actually make a submission to this process, yes, but not through this forum. I apologise, I misunderstood. Thank you, but thanks for being here as well. Just in closing, I'd like to thank you again. Thank you very much. I'd also like to thank Ahi Ka Ropo for being here and Te Komite Nui as well. We appreciate you attending and all the work that you've done to put together this draft plan, and we congratulate you on this work. It is indeed a very topical piece of work for Rotorua, and also there's a lot, I know no doubt you'll get a lot of feedback, and we'll probably hear some from us as well. We look forward to actually working with you and perhaps talking about the governance group, and we thank you very much again for your time. Please travel safe as you leave. Thank you.
See you at the hearings.
Just give our guests a moment to get themselves sorted. Thank you, councillors. I just wonder now, we've got the next item up is actually the speed management planning deliberations. There was significant feedback and it's quite a big piece of work. I just wonder if we have a break now for morning tea and have a break now rather than running over into the morning tea time. So if we break now for 20 minutes, is that all right? Yep, that'll be great. Come back. Sorry. Good evening. Convene back at 5:02. Thank you. Welcome back, staff, and welcome back to those who are viewing online. Can you hear us, Councillor Patterson, okay? Great, thank you very much. So we're on to item 7, the staff reports, and 7.1 is the Speed Management Planning 2023 Deliberations Report. This is on page 13 of the agenda. I'd like to ask for a mover and a seconder to receive the report that titled Speed Management Planning Deliberations Report be received. Can I have a mover? Councillor Lee. Seconder, Councillor Kai Fong. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. And we have Stavros approaching the stand. And Daryl Robson, welcome. And they're here to overview their report. Over to you.
Morena tatu katoa. Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to table the report, which is the result of directions elected members have given us back in May to proceed and undertake a community consultation process on how to give effect to the new transport rule in terms of setting speed limits. I think the report is self-explanatory. I just would like to make a couple of comments and then we'll take any questions you may have on that in our report, if it's okay. It's important to note that we have to prepare and submit a draft speed management plan for the district by the 29th of March this year. This report outlines the community feedback we had and arrives at a set of recommendations for your consideration, obviously, and that's something we would appreciate your guidance in that respect. Whatever your guidance is, at the end of the day, we will need to construct a draft management plan, and takes a significant amount of time to do it because it's not a blanket our plan. It has to address all our district roading system, and we need to submit it to the Director of Transport at the end of March. If we do not have a sense of direction, it's quite important for elected members to note that there's a risk that the Director of Transport may make that decision on our behalf. So it is quite important for us to understand that we need to get a direction today and we need to proceed to construct a draft management plan. I was also aware there are some questions with regards to the process of implementing certain requirements on speed limit settings around schools with regards to the distance. Those speed limits will apply. I have provided some early indications that the standards require a minimum distance of application, and there are reasons behind that. And the minimum distance usually, in terms of the specifications, is rough order about 10% of the speed limit. If you have if you have a 30 kilometers speed limit or a 50 kilometer speed limit, the distance you have to apply it's multiplied as a percentage of that. So if you go, for example, on a speed limit of 50 kilometers per hour, you need to have a minimum of 500 meters of zone where the speed limit applies. Where you have 30 kilometers, a minimum is 300 meters. And of course, that's a minimum. Every individual case has got unique characteristics about lines of sight, existing signage, entrances and exits, and so on, and you require some degree of flexibility behind that, and that is something you need to be cognizant as to what is the space for which you apply a given speed limit, and those standards need to be complied at the very least at their minimum levels, as they're required. The rest of the reports basically outlines that the community are reacted in a negative way to some widespread speed reduction in the residential streets. I don't think that's a surprise to this council or to us as officers. However, it appears to be a general support for managing speed limits outside vulnerable areas like schools. And I would like to remind elected members that in our schools, some 20% of our most vulnerable population attend every day. We've got about 18,000 people from the age of 5 to 18. If our recommendations arising from this community feedback could be accepted, it's quite important to know the statistical relevancy of those areas. We have 1,000 kilometers of roads. Those speed limits restrictions will apply to only about 2% of our total roading network, and will have an impact, which we believe is a positive impact, on about 20% of our vulnerable population. So there might be some considerations by individuals in the community, but the net reality is that schools are places where vulnerable children go, and unfortunately, from time to time, they do make decisions that are not always consistent with, with good practice, and therefore the safety environment around those schools needs to be structured in a way that makes allowances for random decisions made in order to protect them. The second recommendation obviously relates to the application of reduced speed limits in the CBD areas. The recommendation basically says that seems to be practical and applicable. However, we should align that with a strategy for the CBD revitalization. So you can have one application and one intervention at one given time, so we don't have duplication of that activity, because that would be closely aligned to these decisions. And from there on, we would suggest that those guidelines are used for elected members to give us guidance to structure a draft speed management plan, bring it back to elected members before we submit it to the Director of Transport for consideration. Again, I would like to emphasize time. It might appear to be appropriate time between now and March, but it takes a lot of time to actually put all the data together and construct a speed management plan in a way that is compliant with the regulations. And obviously, if you also want to have one final consideration of that draft speed management plan, we need to give us some time to feed it into your reporting regime. The risk of not meeting the timeframes is that someone else might make a decision on our behalf, and I think that's a risk that we need to be cognizant of. To that effect, happy to take any questions elected members may have, and I will wait for your decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Stavros, and thank you for your report and for all the options and background behind that, and for your further information that you've just provided, which adds additional context to this. I'd just like to signal that I would like to move a motion once we get through the questions side of things. That is a little bit different to what is in here, but along the same lines, and it's actually along the lines of what you've just spoken to, but I'll leave that for now and I'll open up to questions. Councillor Kofong.
Thank you, Chair. Stavros, so are you suggesting that instead of the non-blanket approach with where the circles of the 1 kilometre were plonked across the school zone, which meant that the whole of Rotorua became a 30 kilometre zone, would it be possible to use a tailored approach per school where we consulted with the school as to where they see their appropriate entrances and exits, and also taking into account obviously the roads, and also is it able to be tailored in terms of particular hours so that not all school zones will need a blanket reduction to 30 kilometres an hour outside of school?
Yes, Deputy Mayor. Yes, that's what we're recommending, to apply to each individual school, take into consideration any individual feedback we may have from particular school, because as I said, there are some idiosyncrasies in each school. We are able to have variable, speed limits, certain peak times, and therefore we have to apply those limitations on a case-by-case basis, but move away from the blanket radius of around schools that cover about 85% of all the residential streets. Yep.
Thank you. I think that's a sensible solution. And just a second question, if I could, Chair, just around the CBD, given that we're still in the planning phase of what we're wanting to do around the CBD, obviously there are some concerns around locations of bus stops and things like that. I wasn't sure what the actual zone delineated for the CBD, because I think it referred to some transport plan in here or something, whether it would be appropriate to delay any decision around the CBD speed limits until such time as further work had been done on the master planning of the CBD and that other work, so a different decision around the CBD.
Yes, that's exactly what we recognise that CBD is a highly a pedestrian dense area. However, we recognise we've got a CBD or the central city revitalisation strategy, including a number of potential changes. And we agree in principle that the speed limits within the CBD would be in line with the recommended 30 kilometres per hour, but the timing of it has to be aligned with that strategy proposal to come to the Council in due course.
Thank you. So there's no difficulty in delaying that decision around that CBD speed limit? No, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kofong. Are there any other questions? Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just the Malfoy Road upgrade shared paths is already in process. We've talked about that at a previous meeting.
Malfoy, yes, the shared path, yes.
Yeah. Could you give me an idea of when that will occur?
Well, I can't at this point in time because that was a part and parcel of what we call the active transport choices funding. We've been advised last year for about $2 million to receive. We only this week been advised that there is potential for that funding to be delayed, but certainly, if it's not, I don't know the answer, or how much delay will take place, will occur, but it's in our plans for that to take place. And that if there's delay there, then obviously your upcoming LTP will pick it up from there.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Because I think in some of the submissions it highlights the challenges on Malfoy Road for the kids. Most of our schools are closely aligned to that school. Second question, if I may, Madam Chair. Outside Boys High on the northern side, you've got State Highway, 4 lanes and 60 kilometres an hour. What would be the outcome of this if we directed the roading people to look at 30 kilometres? Would that apply there? And secondly, would there be some infrastructure improvements to get the boys across those 4 lanes safely?
Two lines of response to that. One, outside the Boys High, that's part and parcel of State Highway 30A. We are now waiting for NZTA or Waka Kotahi to advise into their funding application to upgrade the whole of State Highway 38 all the way from Sala Street, towards State Highway 5, and revocate it back to the council. We will not know the answer for that until the National Land Transport Draft Programme has been progressed later in the year. Those schools are assuming that the funding is not available, assuming the revocation funding is not available, then this will allow us to reduce the Pohutukawa Street speed limits to 30 km in a specified zone. And then when the upgrade or the revocation of the state highway takes place, we take responsibility for that, and then we implement additional safety measures in conjunction with that. But this approach allows us to work in conjunction and in collaboration with the NZTA to apply the reduced speed limits in front of the school there and implement additional safety measures as they're required.
But only after we take possession of it. that we say?
Now, we can do both together with Waka Kotahi. Our expectation is that Waka Kotahi will get the funding in the National Land Transport Program and start to work there, and obviously safety improvement measures will be incorporated into that. But in the event there is a delay, then we can continue to work with Waka Kotahi to implement the speed limits in collaboration with them in front of the school and introduce some pedestrian crosses in a safety regime that is required.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Waru and then Councillor O'Brien.
Tēnā koe te tiamana, ki tēnā korua. There was just more points of clarification really for me around the timing of the this plan. March, did you say it needs to be done by?
The draft speed management plan has to be submitted to the Director of Transport by the 29th of March next year.
Thank you. And the other one was, can you envisage from now till then, well, till February, let's say, that's sufficient time to put that plan together, given there's Christmas, New Year's, all this stuff coming up?
Yes, my comment was made that in order to prepare a requirement compliant draft speed management plan, we need this time to prepare it and also give you a final opportunity to have a look on the draft management plan before we submit it in early March.
Just one last part, I thank you. In terms of I think you mentioned the Director of Transport having the ability to make a decision for us. What would the triggers be for that to happen, or with regards to this plan?
Well, there are two possibilities. One is that if we don't respond to the transport rule, someone has to make a decision. If we do respond in a way that, in their opinion, seems to be inconsistent with the expectations of the transport rule, they still might make recommendations or reject our draft speed management plan and suggest we should take alternative actions. However, having submitted the draft speed management plan at least will give us an opportunity to justify and explain our positions for that, as opposed to not submitting a speed management plan. Yeah.
That's a risk. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you for clarifying, Councillor Waru. Now it's Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through the Chair, thank you, Stavros. Thank you. Could I just ask, could you tell me how many approximately, do you have any figures on how many car accidents or vehicle incidents have been attributed to speed, say, in the last 3 to 5 years? Do you have any figures on that?
No, not off my head. What I do know, I can tell you for Rotorua, the social cost of crashes or injuries resulting from crashes are in the level of $62 million a year. Now, you are quite right. There are 3 reasons for crashes, main reasons. One is road condition. Second one is vehicle condition. And the third one is driver concentration or driver behavior. It is quite right that that many times driver behavior is a dominant factor behind those kind of crashes. Now, there is irrefutable evidence that when crashes occur at a higher speed limit, at certain speeds parameters, the resulting injuries and severity are much higher than lower speeds. Now, but I can't tell you exactly how many of the crashes that occurred in Rotorua are a result of higher than the posted speed limits.
Thank you. Supplementary. Thank you for that. Could I ask then, since we don't have that info, what would be the if these changes went ahead as proposed, either one of the options, what's the incentive for someone that doesn't follow the current speed limits to suddenly change their behaviour because we've changed a sign? What's going to be the motivational factor there?
Well, again, statistical evidence indicates that every time you post a formal speed limit, the general average speed that is used is compliant with that or within the range of that speed limits. It does not eliminate the margins on the other side where people actually will ignore it no matter what. So by a process of laws of averages, suppose that if you have the majority of people complying with the posted speed limits, and if a crash occurs, and not necessarily because of the driver, but because a pedestrian decides to cross the road in an uncontrolled environment, the resulting injuries and consequences are a lot less. So the other area which can influence that compliance is the ability of the police, for example, to enforce it. If you're driving outside the school at about 55 kilometers an hour, the police generally would not enforce it. If you put a speed limit at 30 kilometers an hour and someone drives at 50 kilometers an hour, the police will enforce it, because the margin between the recommended speed limit and the actual speed are significant and enforceable.
Thank you. Do we have any stats on how many infringements, say, around schools in particular, the police are currently enforcing? Because I would suggest that they may have other priorities just at this moment, but I'm open if you have any figures.
No, sir, I don't.
No, fine. Could I just bring up on the recommendations, recommendation number 2, that the committee note the community feedback arising from the consultation process and accepts the recommended approach. Could I ask you on the democratic front, how on one hand do we note 88% and in some of the options 75, I appreciate it fluctuates, but in your own figures here 88% oppose. How do we note that but then go ahead and still put through when the same people will be the ones observing or conducting the speed limits and traffic behaviour?
I think so. The initial proposal based on the speed rule was to apply a widespread speed limit reductions in most of the streets of the district. The community feedback came back and said, no, we generally have a significant degree of sympathy for speed limit reductions out schools and highly dense pedestrian areas, but not on residential streets. And therefore, our recommendation is not to reduce the speed limits in the residential streets and only focus on schools and the CBD. And when it comes to CBD, we said we defer it at the appropriate time when the strategy is approved. But for schools, we are required to implement the speed limit reductions on 40% of the schools by 2024 or 25, and the rest of them by 2027. So that's our recommendations. I believe the democratic feedback indicated that reducing speed limits on the residential street is unacceptable, not supported, and therefore our recommendation is not to do that. Only focus on schools and the CBD with some time variance.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor O'Brien. Mayor Tapsell.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, through you, and my apologies for my delay to return. The question that I have is around the setting of the speed limits and further advice or suggestions that we could give through the final draft Territorial Authority Speed Management Plan, because what I see as the key issue amongst all of this is when the government removed our ability to be able to set our speed limits and provide a local voice and provide local solutions, it made it very difficult for us to then have to put national policy and put national policy into a way that suits us locally. So as part, and we have heard quite strongly through the feedback that many are against. So when we do provide our final draft, is there the possibility for us to also suggest and recommend that it would be much better in future for us to be able to, as we have previously, set our own speed limits in our own areas?
Thank you, Your Worship. I think we can recommend it. There's no question about it. And I think we can recommend what we call a place-based approach, which suits our requirements. However, the transport rule is embedded into legislation now. It's a law, it's a requirement to be made, and obviously that needs to change to allow us to take place. So there's nothing stopping us in coming back to elected members around about early March to say that's a draft recommendation, and perhaps we should make a recommendation at that point in time that speed limit setting and management should remain at the prerogative of the road controlling authority, which is HTLA. I don't have any particular strong opposition to that, other than the fact that the transport rule as it is at the moment requires a process to be followed, and those processes need to change if that's going to take place. But we can make that recommendation, no question about it.
Thank you. And Councillor Waru?
Tēnā koe te chairman, thank you for your indulgence. I apologise, Stavros, I had a question that I forgot to ask you when I was talking to you. And it's just around, when I read through the report, referred to kura, schools and so on and so forth. And it might be a little bit different, but I didn't see anywhere in there where I got the gist that kohanga reo, ECE centres, kindergarten, are those under the same umbrella, even though it's a bit different? Are they going to be affected as well? Just a question as a chair of ECE centre.
I think there are a range of primary and intermediate and high schools that we are addressing at this point in time. I think at the same time, if we accept the principle that in areas where children walk or cycle or find their own way to their places, obviously the risk is quite high. Now, if we establish that accepted principle, and let's say another childcare centre or early childhood education centre says, look, we've got some concerns about children walking in and out of school, then we have established a principle and can consider it on a case-by-case basis.
So, yeah, case-by-case basis. Kia ora, thank you.
Thank you. I'll have a question from Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excuse me. I heard Councillor O'Brien touch on this, and I'm not quite sure. I couldn't hear properly what Stavros' answer was. So my question might be on the same lines. I apologise if I'm repeating it. Stavros, can you tell me if the police have told you how they're going to enforce this?
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. We all need to acknowledge, and we do acknowledge, that police resources are limited. However, once you post a speed limit, then obviously police are driven by data and incidences of breaches, and their assurance is that they will be attending areas to so-called fly the flag and make sure that people are aware those speed limits are monitored and are enforced. I cannot give you or anyone else the assurance that the police will be able to be everywhere at the same time, no more than they can be everywhere at the same time when applying general safety considerations for the district, but certainly setting a speed limit, it establishes a legal parameter through which people need to behave, and the police are given the opportunity and the ability to enforce. But I can't tell you, other than the fact that they assure us that they will, as long as you comply with the standards, they will do patrols, they will enforce, as required, but it's not going to be universal, and at all places, at all times. That's what I understand it.
Right. So just so my understanding, after having a conversation with somebody in the force who does this as a regular part of their day, that the roving police units, their radars don't work if they are moving. They have to be travelling at over 34 kilometres an hour before their radars work. So that would mean that the police would actually have to break the speed limit if they were going to enforce this themselves, unless they are stationary. If they're parked, then they work. And I believe, just from personal observation, we have one blue van, which is a speed camera van. So, interesting way they're going to manage this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Sorry, Councillor Lee, there's a question from you as well. I missed you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, gentlemen, for your report. I guess you're aware that we have a new government now, well, in the process of forming. but led by the National Party, who has whose Transport Minister, Simeon Brown, or Transport spokesman at this stage, says that the Labor government had exposed its anti-car ideology through these speed limits. And he promises that National will repeal and replace the rules that set speed limits so that economic impacts, including travel time, etc., are dealt with. So we have an incoming National government that has promised to abolish these rules. Why are we bothering to spend more time on this and engage with an ideology that the community have roundly rejected, with proportions of like 88% of people opposed to this whole scenario?
I have no comment on that, Councillor Lee. All I would refer you to the recent advice we got from the local government in New Zealand that said very clearly the statements and insinuations or promises parties have made at the pre-election are not a substitute for complying with the current legislation. When the new government comes in place and they genuinely do not agree with current national policy statements or legislation, then change the rules or legislation, then we would take advantage or opportunity to comply with that. I can't, in all honesty, respond to what the intention of the government would be and how those intentions will be translated into repealing current and existing legislation in a way that would be meaningful to you as elected members in my capacity to advise you how to comply with existing legislation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stavros. Is there anything you'd like? No, there's nothing to add from the CE. Thank you. Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your leniency. Thank you again, Stavros. Could I just ask you, now, sorry, if option 1 is pretty much the status quo apart from the CBD and schools, could I ask you, where does that leave rural roads? Because up above on page 19 where you talk about it, it talks about a 2-step process. So if we adopt option 1, are rural roads remaining current as is until you come back to us, or?
Our report identified that consistent with actions the Waka has taken on a number of state highways, we have reduced the speed limits from 100 kilometers to 80 kilometers and 60 kilometers in some area. We're suggesting in this report that we follow with that, with that approach, also too. But that's a recommendation. My personal view is that many rural roads are really unsafe to be driven at 100 kilometers per hour. That's my personal view. However, again, that's our recommendation on the table for you. And if you selected members were to modify the recommendation, we are open to do that. But that's our inclination, is that a lot of our rural roads are not structured in a way that really should be driven in a safe way at 100 kilometers per hour.
Thank you. Could I just say, Madam Chair, for me, that doesn't quite meet the standards of status quo, but I'll leave that for comments later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Brien. Councillor Lee, you had another question?
Thank you for your indulgence, Madam Chair. Yes, just following on from Councillor O'Brien's line, it says here under option 1 that this would give the community a chance to get used to the speed limits being lowered gradually. Is this really the thin edge of the wedge, and really we're going to carry on from here? Is that the intention?
It's very true that if you want to implement change, it's better to do it in a way that is transitional change. However, each step has to be based on tangible evidence-based that the next stage it is required. The feedback we had from the community was quite a significant feedback. It, in general terms, indicates that the community are more amenable and acceptable and accepting the fact that vulnerable sites like schools and CBD areas needs, are really conducive to this kind of change. Now, if we're going to go to the further requirement to reduce a blanket speed limits everywhere else. We can't make this decision without actually reconsulting with the community again, or getting your approval, or getting the relevant government agencies, input into that process. I've certainly, now we as officers here don't have an agenda behind that, so we don't have any, what you call thin edge, or the intention. We merely reflecting what the legislation requires us to do. We reflecting the community feedback, and certainly, a transitional change is always preferable to a revolutionary change. But that's decisions you as elected members can make at any given time. Thank you.
What are the current speed limits outside schools?
50 k's.
But during school transition time, school out time, doesn't it slow down? Isn't there a requirement under the road code to slow down at that time?
No.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that probably covers off the questions, councillors. Just moving forward into the next section, I'd just like to thank Stavros and Daryl for their advice and further input today to give clarity to what to our community. I would like to move a that reflects our obligations under the Land Transport Setting of Speed Limits rule, and also acknowledge the timeframes that we have available to us, and additionally that will address the concerns of the community and the feedback that we've received, which is significant, and we're very grateful for that because it actually helps to inform this decision-making process. I would just like to signal that my motion will be slightly and the fact that the item number 2 will be broken into, I'm sorry, I'm very quiet. Can everyone hear me okay? Oh, it's not working properly. Apologies, everybody. Is that better? Slightly? No? Oh, I need to speak louder. There we go. All right. So, instead of the approach that's taken in the point 2, I suggest that we actually break it down in a way that has been actually alluded to around the table and by our officers this morning, and that we note the community feedback that has risen from the consultation process, which has been significant, and that we I recommend that we reduce the speed limits to 30 k's around urban and rural schools, taking into consideration the entrances and feedback from the schools so that they have input into any decisions made around their places, and it covers off our responsibilities to those that are vulnerable in our community. My second part of the recommendation would be that any speed limit changes in the CBD could actually be postponed or deferred until we complete our discussions around the revitalisation plan in the CBD. This may also add some further detail that is missing and could actually be part of the discussion when we do that sort of work. And then finally, I would suggest that the speed limits around the rest of the district should remain the same, and taking on board that yes, we do have an incoming government, we don't know what their plans may be or may not be, but we could address that at a later stage if need be. So that's the 3 parts of the first recommendation. The last part that I would say is that it would be, and it's not mentioned in the recommendation above, is that we would like, I suggest that we would like some feedback before it actually goes off and is submitted, so that we actually have a chance to have a look over, come back to the committee, yes, so that it would come back to the committee and we see the detail and the way that the officers recommend that we move forward. So I don't know whether we can put that up. Yeah, that would be my motion if we could. That the committee note the considerable community feedback arising from the consultation process and recommends the following approach. Speed limits are reduced to 30 kilometres around urban and rural schools, taking into consideration main entrances to the schools and advice from each school regarding their use of these entrances. Secondly, any speed limit in the CBD be deferred until relevant decision-making discussions have been finalised regarding the pending revitalisation plan for the inner city. And finally, the speed limits in the remaining district remain as they are, pending further consideration of the new government's transport policies. And the final part of the resolution would be that the committee authorises officers to prepare a final draft Territorial Authority Speed Management Plan and bring it back to the committee for final approval before it is submitted to the Director of Land Transport for certification in March 2024. I now would ask if there's anyone that would second that motion. Councillor Kaifong.
Thanks, Chair. I would second that, but I just wondered with a slight amendment around the first one around the speed limits, around the hours, whether that should also be included in that given.
Yeah, I'm happy
Do you think that that's included in there?
Take suggestions on that. What would you suggest?
Well, that's your motion, isn't it, Madam
Yeah,
Chair? So it's up to you to amend it or not, otherwise we'll have to go through a whole other...
Yeah, I think that it could reflect the school calendar or school hours. It's just the wording would be... what would you recommend, Stavros?
We recommend that speed limits are set, either reduced to 30 kilometers around urban and rural schools as recommended for variable speeds setting limits, because they will be during peak times in the morning and the afternoon.
Okay. So we just need to add a part about variable speeds at various times of the day.
Yeah.
Is that able to be?
I would second that on that basis, Madam Chair.
Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just would like to voice I will be supporting, but could I also ask about the period of space? I think it talks about 500 metres in the report. Personally, I think that could be much reduced, but I'd like that to be further looked into as well, if possible. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, and it is actually an issue that is of concern to the community and to us. I think that detail will come back when the plan is submitted to us, and I guess, Stavros and his team are taking on board this feedback. Or would you like it?
Very, very happy with that, Madam Chair. Just wanted to voice it to make sure our support staff knew.
As I said, the minimum distance is 300 metres, the minimum.
The minimum distance is 300 metres.
But we've got to take in consideration the ground condition in this area.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, sorry, could I just ask, so is that 300 metres on either side of the entrance, or how is that measured?
Entrance point,
Thank you.
Just I'll pause for a minute and we'll make sure that we get the motion right. Just let the staff have a chance.
We need Stavros to give us the correct wording again.
Okay.
Variable speed limit. So if you could just double check what's on the board.
Stavros, if you would mind just checking what's on that first bullet point and getting the wording right for us, please.
As recommended, as recommended for setting variable speeds at different times of the day. As recommended for setting variable speeds at different times of the day. Okay, that's fine.
So, sorry, Madam Chair, I'm getting a bit confused here. Are you editing your...
Yes, I'm just seeking advice from
you. Because it's been moved and seconded.
Yeah. Councillor Kaifong just asked if she could actually have some clarity, and I'm just seeking advice from our officers actually, because I don't know the answers specifically to what we're able to do and not do, and I don't want to put things into a motion that aren't correct. We can still discuss this, obviously, and amend or otherwise, but it's just I want to get the wording right, otherwise we might be going down a rabbit hole that we don't want to go down. Yeah, that's my intent anyway.
Yes, yeah, I don't want to be a rabbit. Kia ora.
Yep, that's fine.
So I'll just read out that bullet point again, the first point. Speed limits are reduced to 30 kilometres around urban and rural schools as recommended for setting variable speed limits, taking into consideration main entrances to the school and advice from each school regarding their use of these entrances. That makes sense to me. Doesn't make? Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so that is my motion, and are you comfortable with the wording?
Yes, I am, Chair.
Thank you. I'll now invite a round of discussion, please. I will leave my comments to later. Thank you, Councillor Waru.
Kia ora, e te te amana. just harking back to my comments before, I was just getting a bit confused as to what we were actually doing here, but I get it, and I do support the direction of this kaupapa. I do have, however, want to, the urban and rural schools, and given my questioning and earlier around ECE centres, and hopefully that adequately covers those as well, as per the conversation that was had earlier. The other one was point 3 of number 2, or 2.3 rather. I don't think it's really required. It stays as is, because the speed limits in the remaining district remain as they are, pending further consideration. I don't think we need to actually have it in there. It's a bit of a waste of space, but because it will stay like that anyway until further kōrero from the government. So it's just a kōrero, kia ora, but I do support.
Kia ora, thank you. Any other discussion points? Councillor Wang.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your motion here as well. I'd like to just thank the staff for the work that has gone into this. It's obviously been a very big piece of work with the consultation done as well, and we heard from a massive number within our community and a majority that has been reflected into the recommendation before us today. I think this approach is, is a logical approach, and for the topic of speed limits is always quite contentious, because it's something that almost everyone in our community comes into contact to. But I think, as we saw from the from the consultation, that there was quite a sizable chunk of our community that did agree that the school speed limits needed to be reduced, and I think again that is quite logical, that the safety, especially at those peak times for our rangatahi, our tamariki, need to be protected and should be able to go to and from school safely. And again, I think applying these speed limits around these areas, we do need to balance, the safety with the practicality and the logic of those different sites. So absolutely support, I guess, engaging with those schools to identify the practicality of their entrances and how that would all work, but fully support this motion and look forward to seeing the changes being made and making our district safer for our children.
Thank you, Councillor Wang. Councillor Patterson has got some comments.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, just like to say, echo the support, the comments made by Councillor Wang and a number of other councillors today. It's great that our community can actually feel like they've been listened to. Significant number of submissions, even during a time when some of them have approached me and said, look, we're suffering consultation fatigue. We've been going out to them with so many things, and yet they actually bothered to get involved with this. It shows how serious they take this particular issue, and it's great that common sense has prevailed. So I'm sure our community will be happy to hear the recommendations that have been put forward today, and I totally support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. And Councillor Kaifong.
Thank you, Chair. As indicated, I was more than happy to support this motion. I think we need to thank the community and the staff. This has been a significant piece of work. It's obviously engaged, if I can use that word, the community, because of what they proposed. As I know Councillor Brown said, a flat-out dumb idea. But I think what we're looking at here is we're still addressing the issue of child safety, and that did come through clearly in the consultation that was still something that was uppermost in the people that submitted, that we need to ensure that there is safety for our children around schools, but also ensuring that we still keep the Rotorua community moving. So I think that what this is a sensible compromise. We're not putting the cart before the horse in terms of the CBD. And for the rest of the community, I think, Councillor Waru, it is probably necessary to have the last bullet point there, because at this stage we don't have confirmation from the incoming government as to what they... it's kind of a, yes, we're going to get on and do it, but they haven't as yet. So I think that gives the certainty to the community that in the meantime, we're not going to be messing around with other speed limits around the city. So Rotorua will still keep moving, we'll keep our children safe, we'll have the opportunity to reflect and look what is actually required in the CBD before we're forced to make a decision simply to comply with some government legislation which may or may not proceed. So I'm happy to support on that basis.
Thank you, Councillor Kaifong. Mayor Tapsell?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, look, I really just wanted to take a moment to thank the staff for the incredible amount of work that they have put into this, and also, of course, the great communications and engagement that has occurred, which, of course, is a result of many submissions. Also, great that our public Facebook comments are also able to be seen. I think it tells shows a very telling picture of what they think about some of the proposals. However, it just goes to show that we are trying to make it as accessible as possible for people to share their view. Look, this is only one step forward. We still need the final plan to be certified later on, so this will still be a work in progress, but I am very comfortable with where we are. I support the comments that have been given around ensuring that our community is safe. It is always a balance between speed limits and convenience. Health and safety is a top priority for us at the council, so we do take that seriously, and we do thank our staff for the amount of work that they've put in to provide good proposals and good advice to us as we navigate a very difficult space. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Tapsell. Councillor Lee?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like at this point to acknowledge that the suggestions that you've made are a significant improvement, and good on you for proposing that. I would shortly like to move a procedural motion that we just leave this on the table, and I'd like to explain why. And I'd like to do that by quoting two sentences from the United States Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and institute new government. Fortunately, in New Zealand, we have regular elections, and a new government is in the process of being instituted, which has promised to repeal these rules, and I might add, at a cost of some $30 million, it's promised to spend in unwinding these rules. So I believe that it is incumbent upon us to give our government, the new government, the incoming government, an opportunity to get its feet under the table, to have an opportunity to fulfil its promise and to give us some feedback so that we don't waste any more time or money on implementing all of this. So, pursuant to Standing Order 25.2, I would like to move that we leave this on the table until February and revisit it then. Failing that, what you've proposed is certainly an improvement, and if I have a seconder, perhaps we could put that procedural motion to the vote as per the standing orders, which would take precedence over.
Thank you. Just before we do that, though, I'd like to know whether there's anybody against the motion. We need 2 speakers for and 2 against before you can move a procedural motion. Is there somebody who would like to speak against this motion?
Sorry, Madam Chair, the speak against which motion?
So only just get prepared a clarification for me around procedural motions. You cannot put forward a procedural motion if you give launch into a debate beforehand. You have to state clearly what your procedural motion is and then put it before the council, and then you ask for your seconder. That is the process. So now we need to move on. I'm sorry about that. But that is the process for a procedural motion, I've been advised.
Wouldn't the chair be able to exercise some leniency and discretion at this point?
Generally, Councillor Lee, if there were more voices around the table that were dissenting, it was in the balance and we were uncertain about what people's thoughts were, we needed more information, there may be more cause, but there's been voices around the table today that are actually expressing some form of support for this motion. So irrespective of the fact that the procedural motion was not put correctly, I won't be accepting it, and we'll move on today, I think. Thank you. So if there's no more discussion around the table, I would just like to put the motion to the vote. I take it as read on the screen there for you, and I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
And against? Carried. Thank you. Thank you for your discussion on that matter. We now move on to item 7.2, which is the progress report from Infrastructure and Environmental Solutions. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please, to accept the report, Progress Report, Infrastructure and Environmental Solutions, be received? Councillor Wang, Councillor Mayor Tapsell, all those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. And I now ask Stavros and his team to present us with the report, and I believe you have a PowerPoint presentation as well on waste management. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just before I proceed with a quick presentation on our waste management, just wanted to note a couple of things on the progress report. The report, I'll take it as read. Just wanted to address 2-3 points, is that a continuous work is undertaken, as I have advised back in 6th of September. We are in the process of addressing a work-safe allegation against the council at the moment, and letting the elected members know that on the 22nd of November, a full briefing with legal advice will be presented to elected members. So, at that point in time, we will give you a full background to that process. We continue to work on our Three Waters reforms, as Councillor Lee alluded earlier. Obviously, at this point in time, while we're collaborating with the Department of Internal Affairs, we do not have any significant new light into the proposed reforms, but we are collaborating with the Department of Internal Affairs in terms of information requirements they have, letting elected members know that the first working party has been convened last Friday on the 27th, and to deal with the lake levels and the climate change adaptation and mitigation work, and comprising our council, Pepland Regional Council, and Rotorua Lakes Trust, and we have established the parameters of our future work over the next 6 or 7 months, and we will continue to advise elected members progress in that direction. Also, while a report will come back to elected members with regards to the Tarawera community feedback, we have initiated earlier in the month. The feedback time closed today, 31st, or yesterday, so the 31st. I propose over the next few weeks to come back to elected members and give you advice as to what that feedback presented. At this point in time, the preliminary indicators that 80% of the feedback supports getting on with stage 2, as recommended, but I will give you a full briefing, over the next few weeks. And the rest of them are matters within my progress report, for which I will take any questions you may have. Can we put our presentation up, Commander, please? Thank you. First of all, can I introduce Craig and Megan? Craig Goodwin and Megan are only two full-time staff dealing with waste management for the organisation. We've got a number of other people, including myself. We can see later in the numbers that we are contributing to that activity, but the total activity is managed by those two people next to me. So I think it would be good for you, for elected members to put faces to the names, and so be aware who they are. Okay. Waste management services, again, can I sort of note that, like a number of other infrastructure services, waste management services are a significant component of environmental plan goals. It contributes to our environmental planning goals. It also needs to be recognized that it is not what you call a preferred service. We have certain national policy statements and legislations we need to deal with that. So these are not managing waste in its various forms. Is not discretionary. We have to comply with the whole range of legislation, and we, in compliance with that, we do have a waste management and minimization plan for 22 to 28. It's a 6-year framework. Again, it is quite important to note that the legislative framework that requires it to comply with it is just outlined in there too, and the leverage the government agencies have to ensure that we actually comply with that is it's in the degree of funding they provide to the district. Out of the waste minimization levy they impose on every ton of waste generated into the country, they distribute it on the basis of district population and scale, and our funding coming from the Ministry of the Environment, for example, in last year it was about $750,000 or thereabouts, and this financial year is close to $1 million. Obviously, if we don't comply with these requirements, we don't get the funding. Again, government has an ongoing path of legislative progression and improvements, and you see in front of you there that, looking forward into 23 and 24 year, we have a new legislation related to waste to be enacted. And I know to have a new government, I do know that these things may change, but nevertheless, this is what we've got in front of us. This has been signaled in the long-term plan of the Ministry of the Environment. And obviously, we do need to be cognizant of these legislative changes. And again, the fact that we are not really the sole determinant of waste management. We are only a contributor to that. A lot of these legislations will apply to industry, to importers, to distributors, manufacturers, and so on. And we are part and parcel of that chain process. Again, the Waste Minimization Acts and Litter Act are going to be reviewed by the parliaments, and again you would see that they will appoint that the Environmental Protection Authority as a central government waste regulator instead of the Ministry of the Environment that it used to be until now. There will be minimum obligations for local government to improve the way of delivering these legislative requirements and the responsibilities. And obviously, they would like to see an alignment of local government waste planning with a national policy framework of legislation and regulations that guides packaging act or stewardship containers, importing containers, and so on. So our work needs to be seen and be aligned with that kind of national policy statements. So everything we do in our waste minimization plan, it needs to be cognizant of these emerging and evolving changes, and we need to continue to adjust our behaviours in that respect. Now, a couple of important things we believe that would be on the in process at the moment. The government proposed, to have certain products bans, case by case basis. They proposed to make it very clear that certain types of waste would not be allowed in the landfill in the future, which imposes an onus of responsibility to ask what can we do with these products? Can we recover them? Can we redivert them somewhere? We need to comply with information provision, and obviously, that will imply for us a significant degree of data management and collection of information to inform the government in how we comply with legislation. And obviously, extended producer responsibility will move gradually from voluntary to regulated product stewardship schemes. If you produce glass bottles, for example, you'll be required to have a stewardship responsibility and make provisions for recycling and recovery of those kind of products, and we will feed back into that general process. Again, this is quite an important element of proposal by the Ministry of the Environment, waste tracking. The sector has to provide a lot more information about what waste they manage, where do they collect it, how do they break it down into its various components, where do they ship it, how do they configure it, and all these sort of things are part and parcel of our operational business usual compliance process that we need to work with our contractors, our service providers to satisfy government requirements, and meet the legislative changes. Again, there will be a lot of data required, and the new legislation in July 2024 will require a significant degree of improved record keeping and reporting provisions around the National Waste Data Framework and how they apply to operators, the principles to contracts like we are municipal waste managers and territorial authorities in terms of how we're spending the $1 million we get from the waste minimization levy. So all these parts and parcels come within the framework of a national policy statement on reducing waste or putting waste to beneficial use. Again, the region is to some degree responding to that. And for example, Tauranga has been leading a process where they want to create what we call a regional recovery facility. Basically, because they feel that with all this emerging legislation and emerging compliance requirements by the national policy statements, it's better for us for the region to work together. We invest collectively in the recovery facilities, managing the byproducts of the recovery facilities and so on. We are participating into that. We are staying tuned to that. However, our current position is that we have made a decision a few years ago, and I'll tell you why, in the numbers we had earlier, that we use a lot of our private sector to do these services for us. And the reason for that is we want to leave a lot of those areas into the hands of the experts in the private sector, because we do have the risk of when we get involved into setting up new facilities, recovery facilities, invest into processes and so on, sometimes it becomes very inefficient, where the private sector has got a significant incentive to manage these processes and collaborate with themselves. So we collaborate at the regional level, but any decisions we will make with regards to setting centralized regional facilities and move away from the approach we've got at the moment, it needs to be supported by solid validation of a business case. It needs to be reported to you as elected members, and you need to be convinced that actually be a better outcome than the outcome we have at this point in time. Again, the Council has taken a number of actions in the last 6 or 7 years, and again, sometimes we tend to forget about it. We have identified that our old landfill was unviable and included high health and safety and environmental risks, and it was closed and capped in 2018. You can see the pictures to the left and the center one, how they look at this point in time. We have moved away from landfilling our biosolids, the byproduct of our waste treatment plant, about 10,000 tons a year, and we're putting in a good recovery in terms of creating a compost and environmentally better outcome than actually putting into the landfill. In 2018, we introduced, curbside waste and recycling collection in 2016-17. We move away from bag into recycling containers or wheelie bins. And also, obviously, we maintain a number of community drop-off stations, both in the central city, in Tinai Roads, in Tarawera Transfer Station, or Kiri Falls, Mamaku, Rotorua. So these drop-off stations are on top of the business as usual collections from curbside. So we've achieved a significant progress in the last 6 or 7 years, and now we have to look ahead forward. Now, one of the important things I would like to draw your attention to is that chart or the table on the top right-hand side with the blue framework there. In 2015 and 16, we already managed to recover for diversion about 10% of our total municipal waste. By this year, we're now to close to 50%, it's 47%, obviously significant improvement. And if the organic and green waste collection goes ahead by 2025, we'll move in excess of 70–75% of diversion rates. This is not something that should be ignored, because in a space of about 6 or 7 years, a significant modification of moving away from landfilling waste to putting waste to other beneficial use has been achieved. Now, obviously, it has not been achieved at no costs, and will continue to incur costs. But significant drivers for that is these emissions credit schemes. The chart to your left indicates the cost of buying emissions credits. In 2014-15, that was somewhere in the region of $10 to $12. And of course, in 22, it jumped to $80. So every ton of waste that goes to the landfill carries that $80 tax on it. On the other hand side is waste minimization levy, will again move away from $10 to anticipated to be somewhere in the region of $60 by 2024. And again, I said earlier, out of the total rough order cost for landfilling of $200 per ton, say on average, about 60% of that are made by those two taxation regimes. And therefore, every time we divert now landfill waste into other beneficial use, we are avoiding those kind of costs. And again, the government now introduced some kind of what you call demand and control. They issue credits, and they manage the issuing of these credits in a way that will satisfy supply and demand. They set triggers, to remove credits from the market or introduce credit, notes into the market to maintain a very high level of compliance costs. And again, you see that from now, the threshold is $82 per credit, but in the future it might move as high as $173. So that's the government's leverage to say, well, we'll make it so expensive for you to landfill, and therefore you will introduce alternative ways to do that. We are well on the way in that kind of direction, but again, with the introduction of FOGO, if it's accepted in the next 12 months or so on, obviously we'll come to the stage where we do have a significant level of diminishing returns, because achieving 70–75% of diversion is a significant milestone for us to be comfortable about. But it doesn't mean we stop it. It means we continue to work on the margins. Now, the activity is not cheap. It costs about, the total waste management of the district is about over $12 million. It's made up of services and operations about $10 million. We're diverting our biosolids to EcoCast or vermicomposting in Karau for about $1.2 million. Our personnel costs, including our support, is about $300,000 a year, but covers, that's the maximum personnel input into that. We've got our corporate overhead and indirect costs about $1 million, making this total number of $12.7 million. And this is funded through a targeted rate, general rate, and obviously offset by $1 million of minimization funds we get from the Ministry of the Environment. Now, again, you are well versed with the food, organic, and green waste diversion. You have given us instructions to proceed to the procurement phase. We are in the process at the moment. We anticipate to come back to you early in the new year, maybe around March, April, the latest, with some outcomes of that. And if the business case is justified and you're in agreement with that, obviously that will be given effect from July 2025. We've got some challenges, at the periphery, which is, when we talk about the margins, we've got our Central City Recycling Centre, for which it's been there for a number of years. It's situated in a piece of land that potentially can be used for other purposes, but the community wants what we call an out of business hours or out of business as usual facility. You can go and drop their excess glass or cardboards or plastics or materials. And I think, we need to continue to look into options to improve that. We will continue to, to refine our approach to event management. Rotorua obviously attracts a number of events in Rotorua, and I think introducing the general waste minimization and recycling components into those events to encourage organizers to be thoughtful and making provisions for that is an important part of our total package. In general, tonnage and volumes are not huge amounts, but there are significant optics behind that. Well, if you have 5,000 people into an open door event and generate a lot of visual litter and waste, it's better to have recovery processes behind it because it reinforces our general approach to that. And again, Megan, especially here, is undertaking a lot of community work. We work to minimize illegal litter dumping. We have, support for various community groups. There's some of these pictures there where community work bees are formed and do a cleanup of a place. We provide them the necessary means of support in terms of clothing, bags, transportation, and so on. Illegal dumping is still a headache and a significant component for Rotorua. It costs us in the region of $180,000 a year. Again, in dollar terms are not huge amounts, it's not inconsistent with what's happening around the country, but in optical terms, in perception terms, it's a very bad sign for Rotorua because certain areas have developed a bit of a reputation for doing that, and it's not really good for our image and not good for our environment, obviously. We do a lot of work with schools, with individual groups, and especially in that young education age of 5 to 18, as I said earlier, with our speed limits management report. We've got 20% of our population is at school at the moment, and that's the right time to encourage them to do the right thing. And the kids are responding very positively to that, and that's list a number of activities we're undertaking. And obviously, the behavior changes. Behavior influencing is a long time process, and we need to be systematic and consistent with that approach. So that's what I've had, and more than happy for both of us, the three of us, to take any questions you may have. But our thought is, as you go through our long-term planning, and we're introducing elements of our infrastructure services, waste management and minimization, it's a significant activity, and I think it's quite good to refresh our memories. The key point here is that Council has achieved a significant improvement in the last 6 or 7 years. In the next 18 months, we'll do another milestone change with the FOGO if it's acceptable, and therefore we'll continue to reinforce it. Thank you.
Thank you, Stavros, and thank you, Greg and Megan, as well, for your work in this space. And like you say, there's been a massive shift happening over the last few years to improve our diversion to landfill, from landfill, beg your pardon. Maybe we'll just take questions on that waste management presentation first, if anyone has any. Yes, Councillor Kiriopa and Councillor Patterson afterwards.
Thank you for the presentation, through the Chair. Just a couple of questions. The first is, with the increase in costs for the general public to take rubbish to the dump, how much are statistics taken on how much that may have contributed to increased dumping of rubbish and, in other places within Rotorua?
Thank you, Councillor Kiriopa. I've got two elements to that. Obviously, you are asked, the question relates to me make a judgment call or what the motivators are the people to do illegal dumping, and I can only offer an opinion rather than a solid answer to that. Second thing is that the general level of illegal dumping, and again from my 35 years in working for local government, really in a percentage of the total waste we generate, it doesn't move a lot. It's just a small portion of it. But as a council, remember that we are offering people household curbside collection, and we are offering people in the near future additional services. So therefore, I think it's very hard to justify illegal dumping on the basis they have no access to waste collection services. That's my view. The second thing is that the cost to the landfills, as I've noted earlier, 60% of the increase in cost to landfilling is done by design by the government through the two taxations, the emissions trading scheme and minimization. And yes, it's increasing. It's increasing as a matter of design. They want to make it prohibitively expensive to go to the landfill. But again, I can't give you a straight answer as to whether there's a direct relationship between landfilling cost, the provision of household collection services, and the illegal dumping incidents. I see many cases which and again, it's a very subjective, very personal opinion, where I think, why can't you put that into your recycling bin? Why don't you put it in your waste collection bin instead of dumping it, on the side of the road? But that's a personal opinion. I can't give you a solid answer for that. I'm sorry.
It's okay. I just, we had some information a number of years ago from someone within council who had said that they could correlate dumping illegal dumping in certain communities with timelines for accommodation inspections, housing inspections, and which is why I asked the question, but obviously it's not obvious. The other is in the pipeline, the repair cafe. I love that. For Rotorua, I was just wondering, has the potential for repair cafes? I know what those are, but specific to the recycling of bikes, seeing as we're a mountain biking capital within Aotearoa, of recycling of bikes to be able to provide, cheap or free bikes for our Rotorua community, which would coincide, which would support also getting people on bikes and out of cars, and would support a move towards a culture of riding. Is that being considered too?
I think, excuse me, I think sort of what I tried to note earlier is that, as we move towards addressing the majority of the municipal waste through diversions, with the fog and so on, it's also quite important to recognize there are areas in the matching like schemes you identified here would continue to chip along, in putting to beneficial use products, and got other benefits like providing affordable, equipment and like bicycles to the community. And again, it's that community T9 recycling center we've got down there has got a huge potential with the right size to have a good recovery facility area. At the moment, we've got the Salvation Army, the Red Cross, facility there, recover a lot of the material, then bring back to they pay the council, about $100,000 a year as a royalty fee for that work they do. But I think if we have the right space in the near future, we can do a lot more of those, activities, and there's no question behind that. And then we need to identify community collaboration basis for which you can do all this work there too. So it's all it's on all our radar. You just have to do the chunky stuff first and continue to work on these areas which are beneficial. There's no question behind. I totally agree with you on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve Ross. Councillor Patterson, you had a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just relates to one of the slides earlier that showed there is no current organic recycling centre or factory in the Bay of Plenty. Is that correct?
Now, there is no what we call consolidated recovery facility. A lot of waste operators got their own recovery facilities in Coromandel or in Thames or in other areas. And the Taronga and some other TLAs, they propose to consider and explore the possibility of having one large recovery facility and compel all the Bay of Plenty operators to use it. And of course, that requires establishment cost, and you need to identify what the benefits of that would be. But it's work in progress.
So just a subsequent question. The one out in Rotorua, is that classed as South Waikato, so that's not included in the Bay of Plenty?
That's correct.
So it's not that far away. Why can't we use that?
Well, we have arrangements with our service providers, and they use it to some degree. But there's a big difference between us owning and operating that, and the sector actually making their what they call business efficient decisions as to what and where to use, and that's the biggest, that's a difference here. Some TLAs want to control and manage such facilities. Our approach at this point in time is to rely on the sector to make efficient decisions on their, as they see fit, and in some cases they collaborate, in some cases they do their own thing. So there's a tension between local authorities managing everything versus local authorities collaborating with the sector to do what needs to be done.
So carrying on from that, has this council or any of our officers investigated the opportunity for factories or businesses to move to Rotorua to set up factories to recycle our plastic, like the fence posts are being done, recycling concrete, all sorts of those new technologies? Have we looked into that to see if there's any opportunity there for us to collaborate with business?
Well, again, there are two angles to that. One is that Rotorua Inc. is not a huge producer of these, of these materials, and therefore the business sense, the volumes we generate here would not generally justify setting up business in that respect. The second thing, of course, from economic development, as you know, we are working at this point in time with greenfield development like pickup block and commercial industrial areas and so on. And if people want to see an opportunity for centralized investment in that particular area, they will make business decisions, to move into that. And again, the other thing we're doing with that recovery facility collaboration or potential with the Taronga and Whakatane and Western Bay of Plenty is actually doing that work. And as I said, the business case has not materialized yet, but if it makes sense, we'll come back to you. But we are doing that work, but at the same time, the private sector make their own decisions in terms of volumes and efficiency scale.
That appears to have answered the questions. Thank you. Any further questions on the waste management presentation? Yes, Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This new proposed legislation that you're talking about in the slideshow, who is proposing that?
The Ministry of the Environment.
The outgoing one?
Sorry?
The outgoing one? Or the...
Well, the Ministry. The only thing that changes is the Minister.
Okay. Thank you. What would the emissions trading scheme inflates the price of waste disposal, which hooks into Councillor Kariopa's question. What would be the price of waste disposal without the emissions trading scheme?
About 40% of what it is now.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll open up for questions for the rest of Stavros's report if anyone has anything that they'd like to have clarified. The general progress report is the other information that we're dealing with today. Thank you. Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have a few questions, so if anyone else, I'd be quite happy to take a break for a little while. Stavros, thank you for your report. Can I ask you on bottom of page 26, enhancing public transport in Rotorua, about our new bus shelters. Can you give us an update where that sits at the moment?
Again, as I said earlier, I have alluded earlier, is that the Ministry of Transport or the Waka Kotahi have initially extended a transport choices package for us at the Regional Council, which includes supporting the public transport reconfiguration. We have done a lot of the work with the regional council reconfiguring the locations of new bus shelters. We have been advised last week that the government had asked him to hold back onto that for a while, but I don't know. I don't have at the moment the answer as to when that funding is going to happen. And the regional council is having some further discussions with other entities like the shopping centre in Pokiro Fata centre about the location of public transport shelters onto Amohao Street, and that's work in progress.
Thank you. So the work. So thank you. I think you've ended. Sorry, you've asked my next question. So essentially, the work isn't on hold. We're continuing on, and those are just, shall we say, obstacles to try and overcome.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, thank you for that. Could I ask on page 27, work with Waka Kotahi Re Nongataha potential developments. Can I ask you, so I understand, I think that there's a great deal of frustration, particularly from the folks in Nongataha, that they're hearing work about development coming forward, but they're not sure of, or they haven't seen plans around roading and the support infrastructure around roading in that area. When do you think there'll be some sort of timeline? Are we sort of looking for a couple of years before draft plans come forward, or next year? When do you sort of see that coming forward?
Well, the National Land Transport Programme will be decided around May, June, the same time you decide your long-term plan in June 2024. And there is certainly funding applications for the Nongataha Centre, improvement of safety on State Highway 5. We've got a Waipa, State Highway 30 pickup block area, and the State Highway 30A revocation process. So all these applications are in there for consideration by the government, but we should have answers by June June 2024.
Thank you. Could I also just ask on the work done around the Utahina Bridge by Waka Kotahi, with the many trucks and heavy vehicles using local roads, was there any sort of funding provided to us to help with some of the damage? Because I saw logging trucks going up Ford Road early hours of the morning. How often that was, I don't know. I can only base it on what I myself saw. Now, these roads aren't meant for obviously that sort of use. Did we manage to get any sort of, shall we say, compensatory support for that sort of work? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Brien. I think just we should know that Waka Kotahi pays 57% of all our maintenance costs, and our renewal costs for the assets. I mean, every vehicle that uses a public road, provided is registered and warranted, they have a right to use it. Whether they go on a state highway or on a local road really is not something that you and I can control, unless you regulate that use. But no, in short, the answer is no. If we incur high maintenance costs or repair costs, obviously we claim from our funding in our regions with Waka Kotahi, and they will pay 57% of that.
Thank you, Councillor O'Brien. Councillor Wang, you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Stavros and the team. After Councillor O'Brien's little break, I've just had a quick one to jump back to around the illegal dumping. I know in the past we had identified in some sites that the waste was actually trade waste, or I guess construction waste from construction activities. I guess my question would just be around, is there any work done to, I guess, not only just identify but work with those companies and contractors to, well, I guess one, that's a big no, and two, the right avenues and what other, I guess, potential things that they could do to reuse or recycle that?
Through the Chair, kia ora, Councillor Wing. Yeah, look, last summer with our summer intern, we did a survey on the litter bin usage, and also we did a brief look at the illegal dumping that we were getting. So the business or commercial waste that's being illegally dumped is very, very small. By and large, our businesses in town, they behave responsibly and don't really see it as an issue at this point. If we were to work with the commercial sector, it would be around, material recovery and kind of in that area there. So what we do know about the composition of the illegal dumping that we observed last summer was it is primarily domestic in nature, household in nature. Yeah, so, and it's, bagged rubbish, clothes, and just stuff that could go in the red bin, yeah, if there's room, yeah.
Thank you, Craig. Any other questions? Yes, Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Stavros, under the Tarawera sewage scheme, it says here that directional drilling is encountering rocks along the main line. This will come as no surprise to local residents out there. I understand that has required the use of specialist, perhaps diamond-tipped drills. Is this going to affect the cost that will be placed upon the Tarawera residents in due course?
The anticipation of encountering rock in directional drilling has always been, part of the tender. We've made an allowance of about 10 to 15% of the grounds to encounter the rock. And the last stats I've seen a couple of days ago, I think the rock encountered today equates to about 10.7% of the distance we covered. So we're well within the tender, the contract prices at the most. We don't see any variation to that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your leniency. Sorry, I hadn't turned a page. Stavros, could I just ask you, on page 29, under the Rotorua scheme, could I just read your bullet point here? Significant impacts on project costs from high lake levels. At least 40 to 60% of all installations now require dewatering and sheet pile protection versus an earlier estimate of 10%. How big a problem, sorry, for an uninitiated, how big a problem is this in terms of pushing out budget, and is that something we need to think about for the Tarawera scheme? Thank you.
With regards to Rotorua, I think I reported back to Council in May with a project to sort of and covering those, those occurrences. I don't see at this point in time any significant change from that $55 million, So I think it's costing us more than we thought in 2021 because of these water levels, but it's still in that range of $55 million. Now, Tarawera, it's not quite the same problem because a lot of the properties sit, prone or higher than the lake levels, and the type of material in Tarawera is different. It's rocky material, but no, I don't think we'll have the same problem because Tarawera sits significantly in relation to property significantly lower than the property in themselves. Whether in Lake East Rotorua, especially the lake level is very high, and if you extrapolate the levels of it, it's very, very close to ground levels. On the other side of the road, so it would not be the same. I don't expect to be the same.
Thank you, Councillor O'Brien. And I have a question from Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You've provided Stavros an update on the lake's water levels for Lake Rotorua. Where are we at with Lake Rotorua and its water levels? We still way above our consented levels at this point?
Well, it's not our consented level, it's the regional council's consented levels. Yes. The data indicated, I think I reported earlier, in the last 12 to 16 months, Lake Rotorua exceeded by 50% of the times the maximum levels. Plenty Regional Council obviously are of the view that nothing you can do. The Ohau Channel can only discharge only so much. But again, the whole point of this working group we have established between ourselves, the Plenty Regional Council and Rotorua Lakes Trust, is actually ask a simple question. If climate change is modeled to bring more rainfall, like we had the last 18 months or so on, and our discharge channels like Ohau Channel or Kiri Falls, are not really coping to that, what needs to be done? And that's what we need, that's what we're exploring. Yet Lake Rotorua is still, I'm not quite sure if it's exceeding their maximum consented levels, but I can tell you for sure it's on the high side of the consented level. That has got a flow-on effect onto groundwater tables, and a lot of properties to the east, and around Hamurana, for example, and near Kotu area, you'll find that a lot of groundwater table is very high at this point in time, causing infrastructure erosion and gradual sort of deterioration. But we do hope with the summer coming, we'll see a bit of a reduction of the lakes levels. But that is not a long-term solution. The long-term solution is to have an engineered approach to say, how do we manage lake levels at an acceptable level? But will require significant strategic decisions on the long term to be made.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Stavros, you've offered to give us a bit more detail on the gold clam situation in the committee meeting. I wonder if you'd like to expand on that, and I'm particularly interested in whether there's a response to the other lakes other than Okokatana from Ngāti Tarawhai.
I think sort of in a nutshell, about a week before, we had a meeting with the Ministry of Primary Industries, the Plenty Regional Council, the Rotorua Lakes Trust, and ourselves, and a number of other people. The general consensus is that total prevention of the spread of gold clam is really sort of desirable, but probably impractical in the long term. The approach at this point in time is going to be more about focus on containment in the Waikato. There's no spread of gold clam at the moment anywhere else except from Waikato, on the Waikato River. MPI are working with us at the moment and Rotorua Lakes Trust to establish 3 wash stations coming into from the north, from Waikato. Those wash stations will be manned or person, or operated by Rotorua Lakes Trust. We have agreed with Rotorua Lakes Trust to provide them some short-term operating as funding assistance for that. But the conversation with regards to the future approach, is that if MPI believes that the only reliable response to that is actually going to be the prevention of migration of the gold clam from Waikato into our lakes, and wash facilities as something that will be required in the long term. The MPA are the biosecurity lead agency, and they need to manage it more effectively. So I think we moved away from the notion of closing the lakes, so prohibiting the lakes. I think people want to see measures that give them comfort that boats and activities related to the Waikato River coming into Rotorua have a reasonable opportunity to be washed down and manage, to minimize, not eliminate the process, of spread. But there's no evidence of golden clam in the lakes at this point in time, as far as we know.
Thank you. Any further questions, councillors? Yes, Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could I just ask, and I'm happy for you to make a deliberation, whether we perhaps put it off for next month, but on page 31 we have the comprehensive stormwater resource consents, and there's a bullet point on that. I note that the Rotorua Business Chamber has sent out a letter to its members, which has been made public, and I think we've all received a copy of it, in regards to some concerns about industrial consents. I'm happy for if you want to postpone it, or if Stavros would like to make a comment. Otherwise, if you'd prefer for next month, I'd be happy for whatever. Thank you.
Thank you, Ollie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just very quickly, but I'd be more than happy to bring a more detailed, I suppose, report or brief onto that. But so elected members can be aware of. Obviously, part and parcel of our comprehensive stormwater management consent application to the Regional Council, we need to identify the actions we are taking to manage quantity of water and manage the quality of water. One of the potential issues of influencing water quality is stormwater coming out of industrial and areas where potentially can contaminate streams and so on. And I think we're suggesting and working with the Regional Council in terms of the consent conditions, a process for where sites that potentially can create pollution to our receiving environment, our streams and our rivers and so on. It's important to be identified, work with them to get a consented approach so they can demonstrate how they manage the potential pollution. I had a call from Business Chamber, Bryce, it was last week or whatever, and some of my staff are working to clarify the rules because there was some misconception that everybody who has a stormwater consent at the moment, their license is invalid. That is not correct. It's only those areas that will be identified or may be identified as having an increased pollution risk. A conversation would take place with them to see how can we better manage it. Having said that, we don't know the full detail of that because we are in a consultation process, about the resource consents. We get the feedback from the community. The Bay of Plenty Regional Council is a regulatory authority and they will impose conditions to that. And therefore, we will have a better outcome and outlook onto that, on the kind of potential outcome. But if elected members want to see a bit more detail behind that, more than happy in one of our next committee meetings to bring a bit of a dedicated presentation about that, so at least you can get some clarity behind that. But the general concept here is that we try to prevent as much of urban and industrial pollution going into our streams. And the way to do it is to identify potential risks and work with those risk sites to manage effective procedures behind it.
Thank you for your answer, Stavros. Very helpful. If I might, Madam Chair, I would appreciate perhaps at our next committee meeting some further work because reading what the Chamber had put out was somewhat alarming. So if it perhaps needs some clarification or further work, I'd certainly appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Brien, for asking the question and for the feedback we received. It would be most helpful, I think, if we had a bit more detail at our subsequent meetings. Stavros, thank you. Any further questions or points of clarification today on the report? Looks like we've drawn to a close. And thank you very much to you, Stavros and his team. We appreciate your time here, Megan and Greg. Yeah, we appreciate the work that you do in our waste management work very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next item on our agenda is 7.3, the confidential items to be released. This is on page 38 of your agendas, councillors. I'd just like to ask for a mover and a seconder to receive the report, confidential items to be released. That's Councillor Waru, and seconded by Councillor Wang. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. I'd like to invite Una Hopkins to overview the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, councillors, again, just providing you with a list of those decisions that are now going to be released publicly following your decision making. These items did occur under confidential sections and are now at a position that they can be made publicly available.
Lovely.
Are there any questions on the items or the Una's report from anyone? No, that appears that is fine. We don't need to move that, just as a procedural matter. So if everyone's happy with that, we'll move on to the next item. Now, there was going to be a resolution to move into public excluded today. There were two items for consideration in the first instance. The first one was the confidential minutes from the Infrastructure and Environment Committee held on the 4th of October. The second was the Crown Infrastructure Partners stormwater conveyance interim loan approval. However, after discussion with the interim CE and group managers, understanding Order 9.9, Agenda item 11.1, the CIP stormwater conveyance, has been deferred until after further discussion in the upcoming long-term plan workshops around Council's priorities in this area. We felt that would be better. Therefore, I advise that the only matter in the public excluded session today will be the approval of the minutes. If there's no matters for clarification or changes to be made, we could just move those minutes today. And it looks like we have a mover to move the minutes. That's Councillor Waru, moves that the confidential minutes of the Infrastructure and Environment Committee meeting held on the 4th of October 2023 be confirmed as a true and correct record. Do I have a seconder? Mayor Tapsell, thank you. If there's no corrections, I'll put that motion to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? And that's carried. Thank you very much for your time today, councillors and staff. I'd actually like to invite Councillor Patterson to close us with a karakia, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So as I started in Te Reo, I'll finish in English. Restrictions are moved aside, so the pathway is clear to return to everyday activities, allied, enriched, unified and blessed.
Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you, Councillor Patterson, and I declare the meeting closed. Thank you, councillors.
Perdón.